Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Hicks. Here. Senator Kinski. Here. Senator Steinmetz. Here. Representative Kinner.
Here.
Representative Larson. Here. Representative Schwartz.
Here.
Representative Simpson.
Here.
Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Co-Chairman Nicholas. Here. Chairman Perkins.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We've got the next item for our consideration is the minutes or our summary proceedings from our last meeting on July 19th, 2021. Are there any corrections, comments, or changes?
Move to adopt. Second.
Got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. The minutes are adopted. We'll take just a second here. Mr. Co-Chairman Nicholas, do you have any comments or anything you'd like to share with us this morning before we jump in?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Welcome firefighters and firefighter supporters. We've been down this road before. I think I probably saw some of your faces back in 2014 and at other times. We appreciate your comments and your input. I think we're going to try to set up a room downstairs.
It's going to be the old court.
The old courtroom. So it's right across the hall. So the people outside or the people are standing here, there'll be a big screen and then you can, so we don't all have to be packed in this house like this. And then if you want to circulate to come up and comment, and just if you feel a little conspicuous because of COVID or whatever, and just want to accommodate you, but make sure you can participate. So just that's available for you downstairs. We want to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions. But as we start taking testimony, it's important that we're not overly redundant on the same thing because you're not the only thing on the agenda. But really, we want to take a bunch of facts and get as much information as we can from you over the course of the next 2 months as we work through a resolution of the fire problem. It's a big problem and it's an expensive problem. And I hope you'll all have the opportunity to review some of the numbers and information that we're putting together. It's a work in progress. There's still a bunch of materials that we're putting together. We have a working group that has been working on it for about 2 months now. And so this is just kind of our first salvo out of the gate to get people introduced to what we're thinking about, what we're doing. And obviously it's critical to your lives. And we realize that, and we want to be as fair and as reasonable and as open as we can to all of you and take everything we can in consideration as we work through this. We hope this will be a unique opportunity that we can find a resolution to this. We came awful close last time, but the problem's bigger now. It's almost grown twofold in terms of what the cost is to resolve this problem. And so, but the more we delay, the more at risk you are, and the harder this problem is going to become. So we're hopeful that we'll get in the right direction and that we can all get on the same bus and find a resolution to this. And we'll do our best to accommodate you and the people of the state of Wyoming, who eventually, to a large degree, are going to be paying part of this bill. So that's what our responsibility is. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Nicholas. Elizabeth, is there a sign-up sheet for those who wish to speak today?
Mr. Chairman, no, we did not have a sign-up sheet for those who wish to speak today. Would you like us to circulate one now?
Okay. All right, we're about ready to jump in. And so as you see, if you've got an agenda, those who haven't seen an agenda, we're going to start off with this item as we move to item 2 here, which is Fireman A pension. We're going to start off with the working group report. And then we've got a couple speakers who are going to testify from the Wyoming retirement system. We've got some individuals who have signed. We have 4 individuals who signed up online to speak remotely. And then we'll open it up to people in the room. And we'll see how we go. We've got just about a little over 2 hours scheduled for this. We'll see how it goes, and but we'll get started. So with that, we've got our working group report. Don, do you have any particular things, or do you just want us to dive into that?
Mr. Chairman, we do have Mr. Anderson, Josh Anderson, who staffed that committee. If you wanted to do a short walkthrough of the legislation.
I think that'd be okay. Josh, why don't you go ahead and take us through that?
Sure thing, Mr. Chairman. So this should be in your packets. It's 22 LSO 125. It's working draft 0.8, titled Fireman's Pension Plan Benefits. This bill was requested by the working group, and it essentially, it does 5 things. It makes some legislative findings related to Fire A. It requires contributions from employers as a loan from the state, and then provides for the repayment of those loans. It revises benefits under Fire A. It makes a contribution on behalf of the state. And then also it creates an account for those contributions that's administered by the Wyoming retirement system. And at the request of the working group, all of the potential reductions and contributions in the draft are left blank in its current form for further discussion. So going over, Mr. Chairman, to page 2, this is where the legislative findings start. They're primarily just a history of the Fire A pension plan, and they're very similar to a lot of the summary points that are also in the Fire A working group report that was also in your materials. Just I would note, going quickly through the findings, I won't go through them one by one, but some of the ones to notice. In paragraph 2 on page 2, you'll see that there has been, since the inception of the plan, a statement that the account shall be administered without liability on the part of the state beyond the amount of the fund. Also, I'd note, going over to page 4, Mr. Chairman, in paragraph 7, you'll see that as of 2002, the payroll for the Fire A pension was around $9.3 million, and that is now $16.3 million in 2021, primarily due to the 3% cost of living adjustment that's been in effect since 2004. Paragraph 9 at the bottom of that page notes that a retirement system shifted the investments of Fire A to a fixed income portfolio on January 1 of 2021. Over to page 5, Mr. Chairman, in paragraph 10, the retirement system estimates that Fire A will exhaust all assets sometime in 2026 if no changes are made. Paragraph 12 notes that if it were to be solved entirely with contributions, that would be $148 million as of January 1st of 2022. Or paragraph 13 then notes that if it was done all through a benefit reduction, the shortfall would be solved by a roughly 57% reduction in benefits of the plan. And then the final finding on page 6 is that a combination of benefit reductions and contributions could be used to make Fire A actuarially solvent for the remaining life of the plan. So then, Mr. Chairman, we get into statutory amendments in section 2. This first one, going over to page 7, this is related to the loans that will be made to employers, and this is just insurance. Essentially, if an employer is delinquent on their loan repayments, this would allow a reduction in their distributions of their under the cap distributions. I'd note here that there are essentially 2 of these similar provisions. One, you'll see reference there on line 14 to 3914.801J. That's their severance tax distributions. So they would look there first, and then it would look to these under the cap distributions for any shortfall. And those withheld amounts are deposited to the LSRA and credited against their unpaid loans. we'll get into that loan provision shortly, Mr. Chairman. Over to page 8. This is the new Fire A legislative reserve account for the new employer contributions and state contributions. Provides that funds in the account shall only be expended for funding the shortfall in Fire A as identified in the legislative findings, and shall be invested in the same manner as funds in the fireman's pension account. That's just to make up, as soon as the Fire A account is exhausted, then this account would be used to continue benefits. Mr. Chairman, over to page 9. This is the employer contributions and loan in a new subsection H. And again, you'll see here that the amount of the contributions is currently left blank on lines 3 and 4. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. The total assessment is paid proportionally by employers, allocated based on the number of retirees or surviving spouses receiving benefits as of July 1 of 2022. And actually, Mr. Chairman, I see there that date needs to be changed. We made the effective date April of 2022, so that date would need to be changed. And then you'll see there that the state treasurer provides these contributions as a loan to each employer, which shall be credited to the Fire A legislative reserve account and repaid over a period of 20 years to the LSRA. And then it also notes that if repayment is not paid, delinquent payments are made under 94601, which we just discussed, and then 3914801, which will be discussed in a moment. And then there's any additional delinquency not covered by those withholdings may be recovered in an action under subsection D of that section, which allows for interest of 10%. Mr. Chairman, carrying over to page 10, you'll see there's some stricken language there. We felt that striking that was required due to the changes in subsection G, and particularly the new subsection J on page 11. It's going over to page 11, Mr. Chairman. The first change is a reduction of the cost of living adjustment from 3% down to 0%. I just note that this is primarily included as a placeholder and for committee discussion. If you wanted to remove that cost of living adjustment, that subsection could also be repealed. And then, Mr. Chairman, at bottom of page 11, we add a new subsection J, providing for a benefit reduction of currently a blank percentage year over year. The same reduction would apply, but would not be compounded. Mr. Chairman, carrying over to page 12. This is the benefits to surviving spouses, and provides for, again, a blank percentage reduction to those benefits. Over to page 13, Mr. Chairman, this is the severance tax distribution, potential withholding for repayment of any delinquent loans. Bottom of page 13 and carrying over to page 14, that's the just the application clarifying how any reduction would apply to benefits. Page 14, Mr. Chairman, section 4, subsection A, that's the appropriation for the state contribution to the Fire A legislative reserve account. And again, that amount is left blank. And then subsection B is the appropriation for the loan to the employers, again, also left blank. and also deposited into the Fire A legislative reserve account. And then section 5, the act is effective April 1st, 22. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. Take any questions?
Okay, thank you, Josh. Questions for Josh? Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the need for the reserve account, the creation of the reserve account. The way I understand that is if we put the money into the pension and at the end where there are no more retirees, and if there were funds left in there, we would not have the ability to pull those out. Is that the reason for that?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. So that's in response to Article 19, Section 11 of the Constitution requires essentially that if funds are from any source or put into a retirement fund, they cannot be later withdrawn. So this would just clarify that these funds would be able to revert if there were any remaining at the once no member is entitled to receive benefits under Fire A.
Thank you. Other questions for Josh? Go ahead, Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Josh, on page 9, with respect to the loans the state treasurer would make to the municipality employers, there's no interest rate specified. Would it be up to the treasurer to decide what that interest rate would be, or whether it would be zero?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, I believe as this is drafted, these would be essentially interest-free loans to the employers.
Thank
And that's
you.
certainly a policy choice for the committee if you wanted to leave it as such, but that's the current approach.
Okay, thank you. Any follow-up, Representative Stiff? Representative Larson.
Yeah, and Josh, on that same page, page 9, was there anything magical about the 20 years that could be adjusted as well, I assume?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, nothing magical about that number.
It's a nice round number. Any other questions for Josh? Thank you. Mr. Co-Chairman, do you have any comments you want to make on our efforts in the working group?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So obviously the question is, where did this bill come from? Basically, we took the bill that passed the House in 2014 and modified it to accommodate the larger numbers and the bigger deficit that we currently have for Fire A, and morphed it into this bill. So when we sat down as a working group to just try to decide where and how to start this discussion, we thought the most logical place to start was with the proposal that came out of the Joint Appropriations Committee in 2014, and then extrapolated that to what our conditions are today. So basically, this bill is almost identical to it. There are a couple different changes. The most significant would be the one where now there are employee contributions that are a component to it. And obviously, we've left all those numbers blank. It's going to take probably between now and the end of session to figure out what those numbers are going to be. And there'll be the subject of debate that we'll hear from you. We'll hear from the Senate. We'll hear from the Joint Appropriations and on respective sides of it, as we begin to wash through those numbers and get a better understanding of what we can afford, what you can afford, and what can work for everybody. So that's how this bill came to be. And so it's not new to those folks who have gone down this road in the past. We just have left those numbers blank, and because we don't want to put numbers in that we haven't decided on yet. And so that's why those line items are blank. And we have to have an understanding of how much money is available and where that money is going to come from in order to accommodate this. So thank you. That's all I had. Just want to let them know how that came about.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. And in there's 5 variables, about 5 variables that you can move to fix this problem. Those are contributions by the state, contributions by employers who are there's 9 employers out there that that these folks worked for: Campbell County, Natrona County, City of Casper, City of Cheyenne, City of Laramie, City of Rollins, City of Rock Springs, City of Sheridan, Natrona County Fire Protection District. So those are the employers. They're the combination of those total are equal all the folks that are in this retiree program. So the contribution by the potential contribution by the state, potential contribution by employers, and then the other levers are affect the rest of the participants directly. There are no active employed participants. All employees are retired, so there are no continuing contributions into this plan. There are, in addition, so the other levers are, what are the benefits? Is there a benefit reduction? And what do we do with the spousal reduction? With the spousal benefit, does it stay the same? Does it increase? And then the COLA, those are the other three. So all 5 of those levers are in this bill. There's no amounts that have been decided yet, but those are the 5 levers that you have to deal with this problem. And so the working group wanted all 5 of those levers represented in the bill so that we can decide how it is as we approach this, that we can take that on. In addition to that, I think we've got some other information. There's been some spreadsheets that have been developed that help us walk through various scenarios so that we don't necessarily have to pay an actuary to go through and look at every what if that we might talk about. So we've got a few tools that have been developed, but that's the work that we've got so far. So if there are any particular questions for the working group, we'd take those from any members of the committee right now. Otherwise, we'll go to, well, we've got a couple people that wanted to visit with us this morning, testify on these points. We have some folks from the Wyoming Retirement System. I think we've got Director Swindell, and we've also got, I think, Tom Chapman, who is, I believe, the chairman, or at least on one of the boards. And we also have Mike Bleakley. I think they have for their support Paul Wood and Thomas Lyle. But anyway, so Director Swindell will go ahead and accommodate you, and we'll turn it over to you, and you can orchestrate this presentation how you see fit. Good morning, Director.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is David Swindell. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Retirement System. Accompanying me is Paul Wood, who is our lead actuary from Gabriel Roeder and Smith out of their Denver office. And also in the room to support if we need it is General Counsel from the Retirement System, Ben Brandis. And online is Deputy Director Mike Bleakley and the Chairman of our board, the Wyoming Retirement Board, Tom Chapman. And they're all available to testify subject to your needs. My purpose this morning is really just to answer your questions at a deference to all the people that you need to hear from today. So we'll try to be brief and answer any questions that you have. I thought I would just summarize a little bit about the history of the plan, just to set the stage for people that may be tuning in that have no idea about all this. And then perhaps my chairman has a few remarks online. This is not the first time that the FIRE pension plan has been in financial difficulty. It all dates back to the early 80s, 40 years ago, 1981. At that time, the fund had like $247,000 in assets and $38 million in liabilities. The fund was not threatened with insolvency. It was insolvent. And the state enacted a rescue plan. The basic idea was for the state to flow money into the plan over the course of 20 years to bring the plan to solvency, and also to create a new separate plan for firefighters hired after 1 July 1981, which we now call Fire B. Well, the rescue plan actually worked. It was planned to amortize the debt over 20 years, but markets were strong and they actually amortized it over 13 years. By the mid-1990s, the fund was back in solid shape and starting to develop a surplus. And in 1997, the surplus was judged large enough to eliminate further contributions from both employees and employers, and to have a benefit increase. The benefit was 50%. The base benefit was 50% of a fireman's first class salary for 20 years of service with a multiplier for service thereafter. And that was increased to 55%. The strong markets continued, and in 2000 and 2001, there was another series of pension enhancements because the fund had continued to grow. The benefit was increased from 55% of maximum fireman's first class salary to 57.5%. And then it was further increased to 75% the following year, along with an increase in the spousal benefit, which had been 66% and was now going to be 100%. That really, in the effect of those two reforms, essentially doubled the spousal benefit, because it was 66% of 55, and now it was 100% of 75. And if you do the math, it doubles the benefit from what it had been. And then immediately following that, of course, there was the dot-com recession in the financial markets in the United States. And the fund was brought below 100% and was starting to get in trouble. However, markets recovered in 2003, 2004. By 2005, the fund was above 100% again. It appeared that all the analysis was correct, that those benefit enhancements could be sustained, and even sustained through a substantial market drop. However, that did remove a lot of the flexibility and cushion of the fund. I think everyone would understand that. And then the Great Recession happened, following fairly quickly on in 2008, 2009, the Great Recession, Great Financial Crisis. WRS funds were down more than 28% that year. That loss in the market put the fund on a downward spiral. And it no longer had the ability to recover solely with investment earnings. And that was the analysis from Gable Roeder Smith in 2010. Said, this is just not going to make it. Now, there's no way that we can project that the investment earnings will recover this fund again. It's going to need a rescue package. And that led to discussions in 2011, 2012, 2013, which ultimately led to the introduction of a bill in 2014, House Bill 51. And as Representative Nicholas noted, it had components of some reduction to the benefit. The COLA was going to be reduced from 3% to 2.1%. The state was going to put in, I think, $38.2 million in two $19.1 million installments. And contributions were going to be resumed for the legacy employers to amortize the remaining unfunded liability over 10 years, and then later in amended, it was to be 15 years. The amount of money depends on which scenario is ultimately adopted, but the engrossed bill, I believe, had the city of Casper paying about $382,000 a year for 15 years. I use Casper as kind of the metric because they make up about 30% of the population, and proportionally they would have about that burden. Cheyenne is about the same. The other entities that Co-Chairman Perkins mentioned have smaller amounts. I know the folks from Sheridan are in the room, and they're right around 9% of the problem, and so on. Well, anyway, that was the structure of the bill. But it passed the House but failed in the Senate. And there's not been another bill. There's been a lot of drafts and a lot of discussion, but there hasn't been another bill come before the legislature for consideration since. And here we are in the fall of 2021. Back in the day, back in 2014, this fund had about $147 million in it. Today, on June 30th, we had $82 million in it. The flow is about $1.4 million a month. We're more than $16 million a year. And the assets of the fund, the flow out of the fund is a significant part of the remaining corpus. And the remaining corpus just isn't enough to have a substantial investment earnings. Even 10% of not much is not much. And the flow out of the fund was $16 million going out every year and increasing because of the COLA. There is some mortality. We are down to 260 pensioners, I believe, in the last monthly census. But the projected benefit payments continue to grow because of the embedded COLA, which is 3%. And so this year we will spend about 18% of the corpus going out in cash, and that flow increases in the next year, going to 25%, going to 40%. In the final year of the fund, about 5 years from now, of course, you'll spend 100% of the remaining corpus. Recognizing the problems of a potential market downturn, the board did elect to go for safety and stability, foregoing some potential earnings, but safeguarding the fund against a market drop, because in the estimates of the financial consultants and our actuaries, the risks were becoming asymmetrical. In other words, there was some gains you would potentially get by leaving it in the market, but the loss to the time frame and acceleration to date of failure was actually greater. In other words, say a 10% gain helped the fund, but a 10% loss hurt it more than that. And so for the time being, at least for the last 8 months, they've been in a relatively secure fixed income investment. Because in the end, regardless of the investment posture, the future of the fund is really at stake with some sort of a reform package. Investment earnings, just as we said in 2010 from your firm, Paul, won't solve the issue. At this point, Mr. Chairman, I think I've said anything I need to say. I'll turn it over to Tom Chapman, our board chairman. Mr. Chapman, do you have anything that you want to add or correct to what your executive director just told the committee?
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dave, members of the committee. And I really want to thank the firefighters in the room for their service. I'm not going to say much more because I know we want to get to public comment. But Dave has mentioned that the financial decline is accelerating. I think one of the things that I should talk about is, again, our de-risking plan that we did in January of 2021. The idea here was removing one of the variables from the situation. As Dave mentioned, that basically if the markets continued to go up at a 7% return, we would buy ourselves 8 months. However, if the markets declined, we would lose more than a year, which frankly, to me and to the rest of the board, seemed like a big risk. This again was not a political decision that we did, but an investment decision. We're also not the first fund that has encountered this problem in terms of a decline. There are other state pensions out there where when they've got 5 years or less in terms of life, where you see them in 100% in conservative assets. So as Dave mentioned, we're losing what, $46,000 a day at this point. And again, I feel like we're here to not advocate for any particular solution, but we want to see a solution. We understand that the stakeholders have multiple and sometimes divergent interests, and so we just want to see a solution. My final comment to the committee, there was a fire analogy used when describing the actions of the board. And I just want to expand on that a little bit, given that we own some businesses in the Shoshone National Forest where there's not a live tree for miles due to the beetle kill. We have created fire breaks around our structures because we're concerned about a fire. To me, this is an exact analogy of what we've done with the pension, where we've created a fire break to make sure in case of a market downturn or a fire that there's going to be an issue. So at that, I will leave it at that. I think our executive director did a great job of summarizing. Again, I want to thank the working group and the JAC for working on this. And again, thank you to all the firefighters for their service. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Let's take a pause there. Are there questions for Director Swindell or Chapman, Chairman Chapman? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. I do have a question, and because I know that the retirement board meets next week. and I'm on the agenda. And what I want to do is ask them if they would reinstate the fund balance and put it back into the equity markets. And the reason I want to do that, and I would appreciate your input when you come up here and testify, is my understanding is, and so here my questions, Dave and Tom, is what the actual economic impact to the fund is. My understanding is that from going from 7% roughly down to 1%, it's about $5 million a year impact to the fund itself. So in other words, we're going to have to come up, if we find a solution for this, and if this bill comes out, every month is at least about $500,000 additional amounts of money that we have to come up with. So if we can go back into the markets between now and when a bill comes out in February or March, we'll be able to save, probably $2.5 or $3 million if we do that. If the bill doesn't come back, you'll have the option then to go back into the into a secure fund. But it's at this point, I think that you all learn that every penny is critical, and every penny we can save the firemen in terms of what the reduction are or the cities is important. And so just your comments on that, and if that's a difficult thing to do, and what's your comments. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take it on so that Tom can correct me. I think that'll be a good conversation. The board reached its conclusions and took its policy statement over a considerable period of time with considerable input over multiple months from its financial consultants, modeling various financial scenarios and judging where the markets had been for the last previous years. We had a market loss in 2018 of 3.5%. We then had a really good year in 2019, 18.72% gain. And we had actually survived 2020 with what turned out to be an 11% gain for the year, all against a long-standing plan of a long-term estimate of 7%. I would emphasize, and Paul can correct me, but that 7% return is not a guaranteed return in any year. It's a long-term expectation over 20 or 30 years. Capital markets expectations in any short term, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee what's going to happen. And the old saying on Wall Street is, October is a particularly dangerous month for stocks, along with all the others. And so the issue will be, yes, you are going to potentially forego some potential earnings, but that's what they are, is potential earnings. And there's also potential losses. A 10% market correction would cause the fund to lose $8 million all at once. And it's a judgment call as to how to manage those risks. In a fiduciary role, the normal thing is when you have a short time frame and a significant cash flow out of the vehicle, that it's prudent to de-risk. And that's what fiduciary analysis would do. The best way, I think, to get the fund back in the market is to have a solution. But there may be other possibilities, and that'll be a good conversation next week. Mr. Chapman, do you have anything to add or to correct?
Mr. Chapman?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. No, we are looking forward to Representative Nicholas coming to our board meeting next week. I think that, we as a board need to understand the commitment, frankly, in terms of this bill, of the basically aligning with the long-term interests of the other funds, et cetera. As Dave mentioned, the concern still is the market drop, frankly, in the short term. But I am very much looking forward to the discussion, as are the other board members. The one thing I would add is we have listened to the legislature in terms of adding members to our board that have very, very deep investment backgrounds. And so, I think the good news is that we certainly have the institutional investment capabilities now on our board that, to me, would rival any other state plan. So I think we can have a really good discussion next week.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Mr. Co-Chairman? Go ahead, Representative Senator Hicks, Mr. Vice President.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Tom, the question I have is on this, moving to fixed assets right now is most of these, at least what we've heard last week from the CAP Finance Committee and some of those is they're real negative yields by the time you factor in inflation. So it seems to me like getting back to Representative Nix's proposal, we need to look at that. But the question I really have is why would we move 100% of our assets into fixed income instead of having a diversified portfolio to try to hedge the risk, but also look at the long-term, short, even the medium term, 5 years out to do that. It seems to me that it was an appearance of an overreaction. But given the shift, I understand the whole fire break scenario. I understand there's other things out there, and to move the whole portfolio into fixed income seems like it was a little bit of an overreaction versus a more diversified balance to try to optimize either the upswing or the downswing of the markets.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Swindell?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's a very good analysis, and the board did consider other asset mixes. In other words, it didn't have to be an all or nothing investment. You could have put half the portfolio in a fixed income and left half of it in a more diversified portfolio. And the financial consultants did model those scenarios. In the end, it was the opinion of the board that the addition of some risk didn't buy you enough in terms of a risk reward. And so they elected to put it into a more fixed income market. But your point's well made.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Go ahead. Representative Simpson.
Mr. Chair, can I make one comment not to correct Dave, but just in terms of Senator Hicks, your question I think is very relevant. And I'm just looking at our analysis when we ran it with our investment consultants. And if we had done, let's say, gone from our current allocation, which at that point was forecasted to give us about a 6% return, a 70% equity portfolio and a 30% equity portfolio and a 70% bond portfolio would return 3.1% versus a total fixed income portfolio would return us 1.2%. So that's really, I think, to Dave's point, where we came down to it. And that the concern element, particularly, remember at the time in January 2020, we had, because of COVID, the markets dropped more than 20% in 2 months. And so there was extreme concern about where these markets were going. And there still is, frankly. But I think that's why we then decided to then go at 100% rather than necessarily try to look at sort of a mix of risk. But again, this is certainly something next week that we can discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Swindell, what year did you say it was when the payout benefit went from 55% of the fireman's salary up to 75%?
Good. Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it was in 2000 that it went from 55 to 57.5%. And it was in 2001 that the following year when it went to 75%. My memory serves me correctly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Dave, my understanding, and I was just looking at the minutes of some of those meetings back in 2001, and so what I want to clarify how it all happened back then, just so we understand it. And my understanding is at that time, the retirement board had the authority to add COLAs, subtract COLAs, and also modify the benefits. And so it wasn't a legislative act that did it. It came from the board's recommendation based upon what the actuaries presented. Is that a fair statement?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, frankly, I believe that the recommendation, I don't believe the retirement board had the full ability to modify the benefits. That did need to be encased in legislation. So it was, there was Well, I think both the legislature and the retirement board were involved in that.
And, okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
So I'm curious, do we have the actual actuary reports from 2000, from 97, 98, 99, 2001? Because I'd like to actually see the reports, see what they recommended, and then see how we moved from 97 to 2003 and 2004.
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, we have all those reports. They've been provided to LSO. I've got hard copies on my desk. I'll bring them over to you. You've been there. The reports are a little opaque, I guess, in terms of the recommendations. The reports simply state that these do appear to be sustainable with some, obviously, you're removing some cushion. And that's kind of what they say. The actual tone of the discussions is lacking in those reports.
Thank you.
Well, and Mr. Follow, so that was my next question, is it appears to me that back then we weren't near as sophisticated in how we went about evaluating what we could afford and what we couldn't afford. And we didn't have a rolling 30-year scenarios like we can put up on a computer right now. It was, are you above 100%? And if you are, and the long-term forecasts are, a 7 or 8% return, then the idea was, sure, we can do COLAs. I mean, it was literally that simple.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, also Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure how to, Mr. Chairman. I hesitate to speculate back then because that's what I would be doing. I wasn't here then, and I didn't walk in their shoes. I think they made the best judgments that they could make at the time. Under the analysis and the assumptions of the time, the plan was clearly doing well, and it appeared it could afford those benefit increases. And in fact, it's also true that those reforms were sustainable even through the dot-com recession. They dipped below 100%, but recovered within a few years. And it was really the great financial crisis that followed soon after that put the fund under on a downward spiral. One thing I would like to mention before we get off the phone, I'd like to echo what Board Chairman Tom Chapman said, to thank all the firefighters for their service. I have a background in military and municipal service. I certainly respect all the work that our firefighters do. And I'd also like to point out and commend the efforts of this committee over all the years, and especially the working group of this committee that was assigned to work on this difficult problem. Thank you very much for your service.
Go ahead, Ms. Vice President.
I do have a question for Director Swindell regarding the bill. If you've had a chance to review the draft. Just a real quick question, and it's just the structure and mechanics so that I understand this. The way it looks to me like the proposed reserve fund would be invested under the state treasurer's purview as part of a sub account within the LSRA. Where currently WRS does the investments. Is any comments on that? I mean, that's the way it looks, the structure of the bill. You guys would be responsible for investment on the current pension plan, but if we set up the reserve account, that would be under the responsibility of the state treasurers. Am I correct in that?
Mr. Josh.
Mr. Chairman, and I believe the intent was, and maybe we need to clean it up, but I believe the intent in this draft was that this would be an account administered by the retirement.
Even though it's in the LSRA Fireman Reserve account.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that's correct. And I don't know if Don has anything to add there.
Go ahead, Don.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, the choice of the title of the account may not be perfect, but it is the Fireman Retirement Legislative Reserve Account. It is not part of LSRA. The intent was that there would be a separate account because we don't know what the right number is. And there is a chance that there would be funds remaining after the last beneficiary receives the full payment. And there could be some question as to what the remaining balance should go to. If it was created as a new account, this reserve account, and maybe the term legislative reserve is too close to the LSRA to make that distinction, it would be clear that it is not part of the Fire A pension fund.
All right, that helps. It was a little confusing when I went through the bill draft as to how that mechanics work. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Any other questions? We have Mr. Bleakley on the phone. Did you want to let him speak or just going to let him be up there and be pretty?
He's also there to support. There's no need for him to speak unless, Mike, you want to speak, but I would stay silent, and we need to move on. You have a lot of other people to hear from.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions for our folks from Wyoming Retirement System? Representative Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Director, I do have a question. When did the last firefighter join Fireman A? Do you know?
Go ahead.
The last fireman to join Plan A was just prior to 1 July 1981. There was a couple of firefighters who were hired in June of 1981.
Okay, follow up. So then all these changes that occurred as far as moving the benefits, the spousal benefits from 66 to 100, from 50 to 55, from 55 to 75, all those changes all occurred after all members were there. There are no new members started after that point, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru, yes, Senator, that is correct.
Okay, and is that generally true with all the changes that were made to the plan, or were there other changes that were made to benefits while people were still going in or going out of the plan before 81?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gru, I haven't researched that question thoroughly. I don't know about that. That's more than 40 years ago, and my mind doesn't go back that far. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Mine doesn't either. That's why I asked. Thank you, Mr. Director, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Guru.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I would offer that this plan originated in 1935. So certainly there have been there were changes between 1935 and 1981. I just don't know. I can't detail for you exactly what those are, but I'll get back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Just to finalize this up, tell us where the plan is today and what there's numerous numbers out there of how unfunded it is in terms of 300 and some odd million versus 142 million versus some other number. So tell us exactly where this is today if we do nothing, and what and where we're at.
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, the fund's cash balance as of 6/30 was approximately $82 million. We have 260 pensioners. And so that's the financial snapshot. To in a lump sum to bring the fund to full funding as of about 1 July 2022. Paul, what would you? I think we're looking at about $150 million, really. The number that was in the letter from the Joint Appropriations Committee was a larger number of $393 million. That would assume that you would invest all the funds in the fixed income market, and that would not really be the case. If there was a rescue package, it would revert to a diversified portfolio, and we would assume 7%. And so that number would be about $150 million from here in a lump sum.
So, and I'm just trying to do the numbers. At 150 million, and you have 260 pensioners, what does that come out per person on a pensioner?
Well, it's I just gotta do the math. I haven't got a calculator in front of me, but you know, well, it's 150 million, do the math.
I think it's $576,000 per.
Yeah, it'd be more than $500,000. Yeah. And that's a lump sum that, in the end, we would deposit in the fund and of course would grow at 7% and would be sufficient to amortize the fund, assuming, adequate experience that matched what we modeled. And those things are always subject to change, as are financial results. And that's one thing Paul always reminds me of. These are our best projections and they're pretty good on the mortality side, less so on the investment side, of course.
And so with the 3% COLA starting in 2004, benefits have gone from $38,000 a year to roughly $61,000 per year per pensioner. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Any other questions from the committee? All right, thank you, Director. Appreciate your time today and the information. And now I'll go ahead. I think next thing we're ready for is public comment. The folks that have signed up, I believe, have all spoken. So I think that we are down to, is there anybody in the waiting room? How many people do we have in the waiting room? One. And I've got 14 people who signed up. Is there anybody in the room who wishes to speak that didn't sign up today? Is there anybody in the room? Is there anybody in this room, sitting in the room live today, that did not sign up on the sheet that wants to talk to the committee today? Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and we'll take, let's go ahead and get the one person in the waiting room. We'll do them first. And then after that, we'll have the people just to go in the order that they signed up. We've got, if Pat Crank, Dennis, is it Peaston, and Steve Bell and Bruce Allen or Bill Allen, if you guys want to come up and sit in the chairs, and then we'll go ahead and come now and sit into the chairs now, and we'll get to you directly. We're going to move through this as fast as we can. We want to hear what you say and see what we can do. So Pat, Dennis, Steve, and Bill, please go ahead and come up and sit in these chairs right here now. And let's go to the person who's online and we'll admit them.
Mr. Chairman, I have admitted them, but they are not turning their video or mic on, so may wish to proceed with in-person public comment.
In that case, we'll move on to the first one. Mr. Crank, you're up. And Dennis, please come down and sit down here. Stephen Bell, please come and sit down here. And Bill Allen, please come up and sit here. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman and members of the JAC, I'll try to be brief because a lot of these guys, you need to hear from them. I will tell you so the question has been asked to me, who do I represent? I can tell you I have 5 signed up engagement letter, pure attorney-client relationship with 5 of these folks that are in the room today. And those are my clients in the lawsuit with regard to whether there is one fund or 2 funds that's ongoing in the district court. Over the years, I have represented what's called the Retired Firemen of Wyoming, which is not a legal entity, but it's an association of folks who have an interest in the Fire A Retirement Fund, and all of these folks are those folks. So I don't have what I guess I would characterize a formal attorney-client relationship with them, but I have lobbied on behalf of that group. They direct me on what's important to them, and I've carried that message to the legislature, and I believe that will occur going forward. I'm going to meet with as many folks want to meet with me after this meeting to discuss it, if we can have a room someplace to do so. That's the answer to that question.
Thanks, Pat. How many members are there of the retired firefighters of Wyoming?
Linda?
Roughly? Robbie, do you know?
It's over 200, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you.
Would be our estimate. We have a mailing list that we communicate with them, and I can be more precise if I get back to the office, and I'll email that information.
Thank you, Mr. Crane.
I will tell you that at least for my 5 formal clients, they have all told me I had authority today to tell you that if the legislature decides to remove the 3% COLA and fully fund this system, we are in full support of that. I believe that the large majority of those 200 to 200 and whatever it is, people that are members of the retired firefighters of Wyoming would voice that same position. You know, we, in the 2014 bill, gave up half of our COLA. It was a compounded COLA. That's why that percentage is not 1.5 in the 2014 bill, but we gave up half of our compounded COLA. So what these folks here who are members and rely on this retirement fund are willing to do is to give up future COLAs to help the funding problem. I believe, and haven't had a chance to poll them, that virtually every one of those members and every one of these retirees will be adamantly opposed to cutting benefits. And I will tell you, having studied this for 10 years, and I went back yesterday and I hunted what law I could find on short notice, because I didn't know that the committee or the working group was considering cutting the COLA and cutting benefits. I don't believe that you can legally do that. Once a person decides to retire and that retirement benefit is set, they are a fully vested member, and those benefits are due them until such time as the retirement program directs. And I'd specifically note, with regard to the FIRA account, one of the provisions that the draft bill says it wants to strike is the sentence that says any benefit increases which may occur shall not subsequently be withdrawn. So the draft bill strikes that language, ignores the US Constitution, the Wyoming Constitution, civil rights case law, and says we're going to take benefits away. So that's one lawyer's opinion. I would tell you that I think you should ask LSO to research that. I think you should ask the Attorney General's office to research that, and then really think about whether that's an option. Because I'm not here to threaten anyone, but I'm telling you that I think my folks that rely on me for advice would urge me to bring some type of civil action if in fact the legislature does that. And those don't do anybody any good. We're looking for a solution. One question I have for the committee is I understand that you're going to use CARES Act funding for the state contribution and for the loan to the cities. So, I mean, that's a much better option to use federal funds to make this right than it is to punish these folks who rely on those incomes, those retirement benefits.
Where the money comes from, it's not going to be from CARES Act, but go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chairman, could we maybe ask Mr. Richards if he'd just opine on that? Because I think there's restrictions on those federal dollars that you can't use them for pensions. So if we could get clarification on that for any future discussion.
Go ahead, Mr. Richards.
The other thing I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, there are two pieces of federal legislation that might be considered here. The first one is the CARES Act. And as you know, later today, the Budget Office will be giving an update. Those funds are largely expended, and any remaining funds must be expended by December 31st of 2021 this year. So it would require a special session to intercept any of those funds. And quite frankly, they've largely been obligated, if not entirely. Separate from that, there is the ARP Act fund, from which the legislature or the state received $1.068 billion. Unfortunately, the guidance in that area, Congress clarified these funds do not fall within the four categories, and according to the regulations, quote, may not be used for depositing funds into any pension fund. So there seems to be some challenge in depositing ARP Act funds into a pension fund.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Crank.
Use the wrong acronym, and I may be wrong on that in any event. But that's what one member of this committee told me, that that's where the funding was coming from. I think the other thing you need to think about legally is, if you loan the cities this amount of money, do you create constitutional debt limitation problems for them? does it go over those parameters that are set by the Constitution, and they have to have an election to take that loan and pay those monies back? But that's just a thought to think about. I think that's a good vehicle to get money into the fund, but be careful there. So I guess to sum up, I believe that these folks in this room will give up their COLA if this body and the legislature find some way to fully fund this fund so that they can receive their retirement benefits they've been promised till the time they die. But I think they will be uniformly opposed to any cut of benefits, and that's not fair. These people were promised those amounts. They were, whatever you want to say about, this committee is forced and the legislature is going to be forced and we're forced to deal with, quite frankly, horrible mismanagement by the Wyoming retirement system and by former legislators. I'm not pointing the finger at you. That's what the problem was. The city's got a free ride. They didn't have to pay in for their employees. And then you have horrible mismanagement by the retirement system, the retirement board, and former legislatures. And now we need to do it. And the other thing that really frustrates me, I'm going to say it. We had this fixed in 2014 for less than half the cost. And people on this committee worked their butts off to get that bill to where it was when it went to the Senate. And one senator has LSO draft a replacement bill that wasn't done till 11 or 12 at night, as I remember it, and kills that bill. So that one person took a 60 million problem and made it 130 million problem. So I'm asking you not to punish my folks for the sins of that one legislator who did something incredibly stupid. Those would be my comments. I'd answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Crank? Thank you, Mr. Crank.
Got one question, just a
Sure, Mr. Vice
hypothetical.
President.
Mr. Crank, is there ever been any discussion with your members to look at a lump sum one-time buyout in the retirement program? Has that ever been discussed?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, not to my knowledge. I don't believe,
remember what the number is.
I've never had that discussion with them. So
It's around.
at least for the 10 years that I've been associated with the Fire A folks, I would guess if that discussion had been had, they would have asked me that question, but I don't believe that's ever occurred.
Mr. Chairman, the reason I bring that question up is I think that Mr. Crank may have illustrated to a certain degree past inept handling of the funds by a multitude of entities. And it seems like maybe one of the options would be just to do a lump sum and then let the retirees, the pensioners manage their own funds if they saw fit. But it's just a question, one way to take that away that never would happen again, but something that I might want to take a look at.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, I mean, you can ask them. They'll get to decide that. And I'd assume it'd be what is the lump sum would be the driving factor, but thank you.
Thank you. Good.
So I just want to provide a response to Mr. Crank's comments. First of all, I don't think it serves a purpose to suggest that Wyoming Retirement mismanaged the dollars. I just don't think that, number one, I don't think it's accurate. They did the best they could under the circumstances. And if you look at the average return over time, it was in the medium percentile of funds managed in this fashion. To say that was mismanagement, I think, is just, it's pointing fingers when it doesn't do anybody any good. On the legislative standpoint, I would, whether we acted or didn't act, what we do know is every year that we don't act, then your benefits continue to increase with the COLAs. So you would end up getting more money over the last 14 years or 20 years than you would have had we solved the problem back then. You just would not have the benefits. You wouldn't have $61,000 average per person. You'd be down to about $45,000 per person. So in essence, every time the problem wasn't solved, the members receive more money than they would have or should have received that the fund could afford. And so as a practical matter, the ultimate beneficiary have been the firefighters. And so to say that they won't take a cut in benefits, to me, I think is not understanding the fact that your benefits have been far beyond what they're ever intended or that this fund could afford. And so I think we have to be pragmatic about it. And Mr. Doty, I see you shaking your head back there. I've got your comments and testimony from 2002 that are recorded in the minutes of the retirement board saying, please don't cut our benefits, when we knew at that time that the fund could not possibly pay for the benefits that you were given when you went from up to 75%, when we went 100% to the spouses. This fund couldn't do it with the management and the dollars that were going into it. It's impossible when you go back and rerun the numbers. So nobody wants to cut anybody's benefits, but everyone has to be a player in this. And so I just think that we need to put our heads together. You have to look at the numbers and be honest about them. And that's what our job is. And obviously we're going to have it come from a different perspective. We understand totally. It's the hardest thing in the world. It's like raising taxes. No one wants their taxes raised and no one wants to lose benefits, particularly after you had it over time. It's a tough thing to do, but we're going to have to draw the line in the sand for everybody. And we're going to do our best to be as fair as we can. So, but I appreciate Pat's comments. He's a great advocate, and I'd want him on my side if I was on your side. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you. So, Mr. Is it Peaston? Peaster. Okay, it's an R on the end of there. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Peaster. Glad to have you today, and thank you for your service.
I thank you for your time and allowing me to come here. And I want to thank all the firefighters who I served with who are here also. I want to keep my comments short and to the point. And to the point for me is that not too long ago, I received a letter from the retirement board. They wanted to know what additional income I had that was coming to me. I believe that question was out of line. I believe that the question was in a sense, a search to see exactly how much pain I could take in some forwarding legislation, which I believe is here today. I will tell you this. I was proud to have served this community. I was proud to be part of the changes that were made in this community. And I'm very proud that I have a chance and a voice to be able to speak here. However, in the question that was posed, I answered it. Many didn't, because their comment to me was, that's none of their business. And I believe that's a proper comment. But I answered it anyway, because I remembered back when everybody was looking and unsure of their present position financially. They were looking for other ways to beef up their retirement. Even though I had all the faith in the world in my retirement at that time, I asked if I couldn't have funds taken from my check and put into an IRA, CD, any of those offerings that were present at the time, so that I could beef up my benefit when I retired, because I expected prices to rise. I didn't expect that I'd be paying $1,500 to $2,000 a month for pills, because I've suffered practically, I've suffered from my job. My job has taken part of my life, and I give that up gratefully. It was the best job in the world. I would do it again in a heartbeat. But I want you to know that along with these programs that I tried to get into, I was told, no, I'm sorry, you have a state retirement program. You can't participate in these. Right or wrong, that's what I was told. And I didn't participate. Additionally, I was told by the federal government every quarter or every half in writing that I would receive X number of dollars for Social Security when I look forward to retirement at retirement age, which is not a lot of money, but it was money. It would pay for a good portion of those pills I take every day. Bottom line is, when I took my paperwork to Social Security and said, I'm ready to retire, here's what you've been sending me. They said, oh, I see you're part of the state pension fund. Well, there's going to be a close to 500% reduction in my check every month. So my Social Security check is less than $100 a month. And if you think I can live off of that and a reduction in my pension, then I'm sorry, I think you're mistaken. With that, I must echo that I too believe there was mismanagement by the retirement committee. And I think that this letter they sent out is proof of that. I want to thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Priester. Mr. Co-Chairman?
Thank you. And so, Mr. Feaster, I can tell you that the reason retirement sent out that letter was at our request. Because what we want to have the most information we can, and we need full answers like you just gave today. But the intent of the letter was, if we do something, and there are people that absolutely have no Social Security or no other income, then do we need to create a safety net for those individuals? So, I mean, the thought was, if there's 260 folks out there, some of them really couldn't take a cut, perhaps. We just wanted more information, but I can tell you that it was nothing malignant or malicious about it. We just wanted more information. Obviously, the more we dig, the more complicated this problem becomes. But really, the intent of that letter was to say, how desperate are some of the poorest individuals who were firefighters, and do we need to protect them? That was the kind of the basis that we asked that question. But most importantly, that did not come from the retirement. We asked them to send that letter. We apologize, we offended you with it, but and that was the purpose that we asked those type of questions. And the other reason we asked those questions is because we're repeatedly told that a lot of the firefighters have no other income. And we want to go, well, how many and how much is it? That's just getting a full picture of what's going on. Because as we just testified to earlier, to fully fund this thing would be the essence of paying you $570,000. And of that, the majority of it would be state taxpayer dollars. It wouldn't be your community, Cheyenne. It's coming from the pockets, mostly of everyone in the state of Wyoming. That's where that money is going to come from. So we have to look at their contribution. And you might recall, we just cut $450 million out of the budget that impacts every walking person in the state of Wyoming. All types of benefits, from the special needs and from, the DFS folks to folks with disabilities, all of them have just got the hatchet to some degree, one way or the other. And in the future of Wyoming, if you look at what we're going to have to do to maintain our standard lifestyles, we can't do it without tax increases sometime in the future, because the revenues from coal, oil, and gas, which we have thrived on for 120 years, are going away. And we're going to have to change what we do and how we do it. And none of this is easy for anybody. And we totally appreciate your position. But we need the facts. We need to know where everybody's at. And we need to educate you and all the folks in the state of Wyoming as to the issues that we have to face as we move forward. And so that you are one component of it, and a small number of people, but a lot of money. And so we're all going to work as hard as we can to protect you as hard as we can. But I can tell you, there's numerous legislators over the past that have been frustrated by FireA because of your refusal to reduce your benefits or to take this issue on yourselves And their position is, well, the law as it's currently written is when the money runs out, the money runs out and the pension goes away. And if they don't work with us, then we'll just let it die. Honestly, I've talked to 5 legislators probably in the last two months that that's their position. And that's not my position, but those feelings are out there. And so this is not easy for anybody, but I appreciate your comments.
Mr. Chairman? No, this is not an open forum. Mr. Vice President?
I have a question, and it gets back to my question to Mr. Crank. Is it something you would consider as a lump sum buyout? Say, I'm just doing some back of the math, but it would probably be in excess of $500,000 one-time payment. And then you manage your money in your retirement. Is that something you would consider?
This is a question to you, Mr. Priester.
I've not had the opportunity to study the question. However, I am leery of the proposal, and I would have to have more information. It's not something that I wouldn't consider because I don't know at this point in time what the consideration needs would be.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Priester, any other comments?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Mr. Bells, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. And we got some, this is actually being recorded on YouTube and there are people watching this. I don't say that to make you nervous, but that's why we have you sit here and
Well, I'm
have
not a
your
great
green mic
orator.
on. And thank you for your service. Thank you for
Mr.
coming.
Nichols, I heard you complaining about the cost of living. Well, that was mismanagement on your part. Because the original contract, the original retirement was we would get half of what the first grade firefighter got as a raise would be our cost of living. Some years the firefighters got raises, sometimes they didn't. So when you give us a constant COLA, we were all very happy about that. That wasn't our doing, that was yours. And when we're giving something, it's very hard to give it up when you talk about us not wanting to cooperate. That wasn't, the COLA wasn't something that originated with us. That came from you. On the other question that Dennis was talking about, I'm on the younger end of the retirement. I just turned 65. I started paying for my Medicare and my Social Security check is $8 a month. So I rely on my retirement. So that's about all I have to say at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Bells. Any questions for Mr. Bells?
Well, I appreciate your comments. So thank you.
And thank you.
Excuse me. For the record, his name is Bellis.
I'm having a hard time reading some handwriting anyway.
Bellis.
Thank you.
And he has hearing aids in because he needs them because for a long time, there was no protection offered to him. So I'm sorry that I have to interrupt like this, but I think for the record should be proper. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate it. If I get your name wrong, please correct me. So thank you, Mr. Bellis. Appreciate your testimony today and thank you for your service. So we've got next is Mr. Bill Allen.
Yes.
Mr. Allen, go ahead. What do you have to, thank you for your service and thank you for taking time out of your day to come here and talk to us. What do you have to tell us?
I'm Bill Allen. I went to work in May 1st, 1965. I just turned 80 years old. And I do appreciate my dad, when he worked as a Cheyenne firefighter prior to me in Cheyenne, he got about $130 a month. And the pension was worth about $10 per month. That's all the pension that they could afford or somebody could afford. So when we did get a little bit more on our pension, I was very much pleased. And I did, my mother, actually, I'd say, Mom, you get $30 a month on a pension. And she says, what? I don't get $30 a month. We never did make that kind of money, my mom. So she didn't even realize the fact that she was getting money per month from a pension. That's how things went then. And I worked from May 1st of 1965 till to the end of that century. And I was going to work in the century of the 21st century, but I decided, no, it's time to go. So I got out after 33 years, 9 months, and a few days. And I'm very proud of that I did that. And so I was very pleased. My dad had no Kelly days. That was a Kelly day that from the mayor of Chicago, his name was Kelly. And so Cheyenne received a Kelly day. They actually worked about 15 days a month. But when Kelly stepped in, nobody knew who Kelly was, but he was the mayor of Chicago at one time. And so they got a Kelly day. They were all very tickled that they'd get a 24-hour shift off per month. And that really did tickle the firefighters, because when they went to work in the early teens, the early 20s, they worked 30 or 31 days per month. They didn't get a time off. They didn't get any time off. If they wanted time off, they'd go to the chief and say, Chief, I'd like to go home for a few hours. Is it possible? No, so-and-so's off this afternoon, so you can't take any time off. And that's how the Cheyenne Fire Department was run when it was on Pioneer Avenue. Pioneer on Eddy Street, they called it EDDY. Pioneer was not Pioneer, it was Eddy Street. And the Cheyenne firefighters worked in that department between 17th and 18th on Eddy Street. And then later on, the same year the Empire State Building was opened in 1931, the Cheyenne firefighters built a new fire station on Cary Avenue where it is now was. And then they finally moved to where they are presently. But the job has meant everything to me and my family. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Appreciate your time and your testimony and your service.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Allen? Thank you, Mr. Allen. Next, we've got, if y'all would go ahead, we'll let and vacate your seats up front. We'll call down the next number of people. We've got Dave Acton, Brian Hopper, Heidi Foy, and then Stuart McCray. If y'all would want to come down and take a seat down here in these black seats. So are you Mr. McCray? And then Heidi Foy? And then is Dave Acton or Brian Hopper here? No comment? Okay. Which one's Dave Acton? And you don't wish to speak? Okay. And Brian, you don't wish to speak either? Okay. All right, we appreciate that. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Foy. Go ahead and press the green button, get the green light on. There you
Oh,
go.
man.
Thank you.
Technology. Thank you guys so much for having us here. I kind of come from a different side of it. I am a child of a firefighter, which a child and granddaughter. So my granny is getting a survivor benefit. She's 85 years old. She's pretty spry, but I'm pretty sure she doesn't want to go back to work. So we have a pretty big concern for her. I'll just tell you a little bit of a story. Growing up as the child of a firefighter is a little bit unique situation, as you can imagine. I can tell you for a fact that my dad worked his tail off to not miss all the things. We were involved in sports. We were involved in high school rodeo. We were involved in as many things as we possibly could, but he made it a point to not miss things, whether that meant picking up shifts elsewhere or working for other people and swapping shifts. But he worked his tail off. And I would also add that because of the pay that he made, he did have a couple of jobs. And I think the sweetener for that and knowing that this pension was on the other end kind of made that a little bit easier to swallow. Of course, I know that now. I didn't know that then. I just know that he worked his butt off. But I think it's something I've had the opportunity to speak with a handful of you guys. I know I left everyone messages and then of course emailed. But I did speak with another senator and he said, well, this has cost us a lot of money. And that kind of hit home for me because it also cost us a lot. It did not cost us money, but it did cost us family time. It did cost us childhood memories. And I encourage you guys to keep that in mind when you start thinking about cutting these benefits. I'm not dumb to the idea that there's a lot of other things going on in the world right now and that there's a lot of cuts that are being made. But when I think about that and when I hear another senator say this has cost us a lot of money, I think it's really, really easy to forget that it has also cost these gentlemen a lot. And while many of them are many years retired now, my dad retired in 1999. By that point, I was already in college, so I wasn't really able to recoup some of that time. We have probably spent more time together now than we need to. It's time to go back to Arizona, I think. But a lot of that time you don't get back, and I think you guys can understand that. And this pension is one of those things that made it a little bit easier to miss Christmas, to miss birthdays, high school rodeos, and those types of things. So I want you guys to think about that. I do understand, and I know that these gentlemen do too, that there are bigger things at hand, but I also want you to remember that they made the cost and they made those sacrifices, and this is the payoff for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Foy. Any questions for Ms. Foy? Thank you. After Mr. McCray, we've got if Spencer Jones, Jerry Spalding, and Bob Simmons want to come down and take their seats up here, take some seats up here, that'd be great. That'll help us save some time as we move through this. So come on up while we do that. Yes, sir. Okay, Mr. Jones, thank you, but thank you for coming today. So the other people, Jerry, all right, thank you, Jerry. So Bob, come on down. Mr. Simmons, come on down. We've got Carter Napier, Mr. Collins, and then I think we have Jane Lessinger. I'm saying that right, Lessinger or Lessinger? If you want to, is it Jane? Yeah. Okay, come on down. Mr. Napier, come on up, please. And then if we got is Mr. Collins here? Come on up, please, Mr. Collins. So we're just going to continue on here. Mr. McCray, please.
Good morning, Senator Perkins, Representative Nicholas, co-chairman, committee members. It's a distinct honor to speak with one of you today. I'm the city administrator for the city of Sheridan, and the mayor and I, with the mayor's approval, I'm speaking on behalf of the city of Sheridan. And we felt that it was important enough for us to drive 5 hours down here last night to be at this meeting and to talk about this issue. I want to first of all thank all of you for your diligent consideration of this matter and for your service to this great state of Wyoming. It's greatly appreciated. Oftentimes, I'm sure it doesn't get spoken enough, but we appreciate the leadership that you guys have in some really tough times. We've talked a little bit about blame. I'd like to talk about responsibility. You know, I dare say that no one in this room is to blame for the issue that is in front of us right now, but we're all responsible for it. Us in the cities and the legislature, we're responsible for this. I don't see this as an issue dealing with firemen. This is it happens to affect firemen, but this is an issue that really is about people in the Wyoming retirement system. I'm responsible for 183 people in the Wyoming retirement system. And it's my belief that if one retirement system fails, every other retiree or every other person eligible for a Wyoming retirement system has to wonder if theirs is subject to failure as well. And the lack of confidence that people would then have in the retirement system, I don't know what the effect of that would be, but we probably wouldn't be able to retain good employees that we have. So that's the consideration that I think is important that we do. And in Sheridan, we value out of the box thinking. And so I appreciate the consideration that has been mentioned thus far and the things that are being considered. And I know that at the end of this, that a good solution will come out of this because there's good minds that are working this issue. I'm not an expert on the prognosticating for the way forward of how much money we'll take, despite the fact that I stayed in a Holiday Inn Express last night. But I would say that it was mentioned to me, one of the considerations that has been talked about, and I understand that the numbers are blank on the resolution, but it was mentioned to me that there was discussion about $50 million being put in from the state plus a $20 million loan at a 0% interest with a zero COLA growth, and that 20% loan being paid for over 20 years by the various municipalities and fire districts. We ran the math on that, and that would be very favorable to us. That would pay Sheridan's payment of that, as I crunch the numbers, would be about $86,000 a year over 20 years. We can afford to do that. I value playing with my cards facing out, being as transparent as I can. And so I will tell you that we could afford a little bit more than that if that's what it takes. We have already budgeted for a plan for putting $100,000 away. And you know, you have to budget for the worst year and things of that nature. But we could afford $100,000 if that's what it took for the city of Sheridan. And our share is about 8.6% of the total population of that $20 million. And so we could afford a little bit more if that's what it takes. If we go above that, we're probably going to have to start cutting services. We can't budget based on, you know, Sheridan County had a good year this year, despite COVID. We have a very diverse economy. As Senator Kinski has highlighted numerous times, Sheridan has done very well in its economy. And but that's not to say it's always going to be that way. We can't budget based on that. And so we have to budget based on what we have as income and what we can expect. And so 100,000 would be about what we think we could afford in Sheridan, which is it's a little bit more than what we would have paid in 2014. I think 2014, I think our share was about 91,000 a year, or maybe it was 87. I can't remember, but it was about that same number. We can afford a little bit more than that, but beyond that, we'll have to start looking at what services we wouldn't be able to do for the citizens of Sheridan if we had to pay more than that. So I appreciate your time. Pending any questions, that will complete my comments.
Thank you, Mr. McCray. Mr. Co-Chair.
So just for the edification of folks in here, when we started putting this plan together and this bill, we realized that the impacts to the cities and the counties, particularly if we required anything other than a long-term loan, would not be feasible. The reason that we want to loan everything up front, so that $20 million, and we don't know what that number is, but the reason we're doing that is because then we get the benefit of compound interest. So if we take 20 million and put it in the pie, that lasts up the next 50 years of the fund. And so we'll get the benefit of all that compound interest. So it makes it cheaper to fix now. And then we just, through the counties, then we allow them to pay their share of it over the course of either 10, 15, or 20 years. And it basically makes the money go farther. So the more we front load this fund, the more funds are available to you to pay it. And it's also easier for the cities and counties to afford. I believe that we've looked into that constitutional issue on the 4% and on the loaning on that and how we characterize that. We obviously will have to address that and make sure that we're doing that in a proper fashion, in a constitutional fashion. So I appreciate that, that issue. And so, Don, I want to make sure that we address that, and we might want the cities to address that as well, to make sure that we're not putting anybody in a constitutional quagmire. So, but I appreciate your candor and your willingness to be part of this, and we hope that we get similar results from other folks. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McCray. Any other questions for Mr. McCray? Thank you. Let's go next to Mr. Simmons from Sheridan. Bob?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman, Joint Appropriations Committee, thank you very much for being here. And I want to go back to the responsibilities. There's 4 groups represented here. There's the firefighters and the beneficiaries. We've heard from some already. They did their job when they were working and the legislation said that they had to pay their bill. They paid their bill. Then they retired. So that's the one group. The next group is our employers. They were the ones that hired us. They were the ones that provided us the income while we were hired. They also had obligations under state statutes for the fireman pension, for the pensions, or I'll just say retirement systems, because there's some of these places are in multiple retirement systems. Then there's the retirement system and board. They have the fiscal responsibility for this plan. They had the fiduciary responsibility by statute. I do not have that citation, but it is in the citation that the Wyoming retirement system has the fiduciary responsibility. I'm sticking with responsibilities and I'll leave it there. My big concern is firefighters have never been represented on the Wyoming Retirement System Board. We are the one group, I believe, that has never been represented on that board. The next group is the legislature. The legislature's responsibility is the information they get from the retirement system and to make those statutory changes. That's their responsibility. So those are the 4 different groups. The other one thing I wanted to bring up is when one of the senators here asked about taking a payoff. Number 1, this is a defined benefit program. You are going to have IRS problems big time. When you go from taking a defined benefit and giving me a lump sum, my IRS requirements are going to be significant compared to what they are now. So, I can understand the discussion. I do not mind having that discussion, but we got to see what the legalities of that are. Other than that, I am another one that wants to sit here and listen to you and work with you so we get a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. Any questions? Go ahead, Bob to Bob.
Thank you for your testimony, Bob. I appreciate it. Couple different things. You know, I've served as the liaison to the retirement system for about 6 years. And there may not have been a member of a firefighter during the time I was there, but I can tell you they worked hard to maintain both Fire A and Fire B and advocated your position quite well. So it's just a true story. Every year, Fire A has been on the forefront of their discussions, and they have your best interest at heart. I can promise you that. I also want to remind all of you that in 1981, as you heard earlier, the fund was $38 million underwater, which means we had a system that did not work, and we had to change it, so we created Fire B. And between 1981 and 1997, the state, Wyoming taxpayers put in $48 million to shore up the fund. It wasn't your money. It wasn't the county's money, the city's monies. It was state taxpayers footing the bill so that you guys got a payday. And now we're going to have to do it again. And so everyone needs to understand the full picture as we walk through these scenarios. And so we appreciate your service, but frankly, you should appreciate the service that Wyoming has brought to the firefighters and the money that we put out of our pockets, because we created a system that we couldn't afford. And it was created for your advantage. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Appreciate you. Next, we've got Mr. Napier from City Casper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your time today. And I really appreciate that we are coming to the table today to discuss solutions and talk about ways in which we can get through this. I think we do need to fix the issue. And I'm here to say today that as part of the City of Casper's employee family and a part of the group that some of these retirees represent, I do believe that I can advocate on behalf of a proposal that I think I see coming together today, which is with respect to the cities and towns participating to some degree. For the City of Casper, it sounds like it would be about a $300,000 commitment a year for the next 20 years. I don't mind advocating for that level of partnership with the state of Wyoming. And I think our city council would be happy to do the same for our retirees who have served our community so well. And so that really is my message today, Mr. Chairman, is that indeed with those types of terms, if you will, particularly if there are no interest penalties for the 20 years, the City of Casper is on board.
Thank you, Mr. Napier. Any other questions for Mr. Napier? Appreciate your tribe and your time to come down today. Thank you. And the city's willingness to step up. So next I've got on the list is Mr. Collins from City of Cheyenne. Mr. Collins.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Patrick Collins. I'm the mayor of Cheyenne. I learned about this Fire A situation when I got a letter right after I was elected, but before I was sworn in, from the Wyoming retirement system. And I thought, man, these guys are really on it. I got a letter telling me all about what's going to happen. And when I opened it up, I found out that we had 79 firefighters whose pensions were in jeopardy. And so obviously I called my representative, Mr. Nicholas, and other folks to try to find out what was going on. And so I'm really appreciative of the opportunity today that looks like something's happening moving forward. As Mr. Napier said, I recognize that we're probably not going to be able to solve this problem without both the entities that have retirees and the state partnering together. And so for the City of Cheyenne, if I look back on the 2014 program that was proposed, I talked to Mayor Kaysen, who was mayor at that time, and asked him about that. I think we're in for that. You know, for us, we see the responsibility for our firefighters, and we want to make sure they're taken care of. And so what I've heard maybe it's rumors or whatever, is that maybe asking us for a $20 million participation, our pro rata share of that over 20 years. Again, as Carter said, that's about a $300,000 bill for us. We're just like you guys. We don't have a lot of money, but we also understand the responsibility we have, and we're in to be a participant in that. I will share with you, I am a little bit concerned about the cut in benefits. I'm not sure how that goes. You know, none of us want to take a pay cut. And so if there's anything we can do to prevent that from happening, I would sure appreciate that. But we recognize our responsibility, and we're ready to partner to make that happen. What I hope doesn't happen is what happened in 2014. We kicked the can. We can't afford to do that. This is critical, and we're in, and we sure stand ready to be your partner in this program.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate your time today. And
Mr. Co-Chair.
coming down. Mr. Co-Chair.
So welcome, Mayor. Good to see you.
Good to see you,
It's
sir.
fun to have you in front of the appropriations. So Patrick and I are good friends. He was originally on the city council. I was the city attorney back at that point in time. So we get the tables turned a little bit. It's kind of fun. I had a list of questions, but I'll wait for another day.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mayor Collins? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And then the last person I've got on the list this morning is Ms. Lessinger or Lessinger? Lessinger. Ms. Lessinger, go
Lessinger.
ahead.
I am a spouse of a firefighter, and so I have just different points I've marked down from what some other people have said and what Representative Nichols' chair has said. This lady back here referenced to family time, and I will echo that. But it's also, you look at all the firefighters here, and if you look at the rest of them that couldn't make it here today, you will see physical disabilities or inabilities, and a lot of them are due to the job. But those are the ones that you see. There are the PTSD situations that you don't see, of the things that these firefighters had to go through that are not pretty, and that the families had to go through as well. Talked about could have or should have had, would have had 45 to maybe 57 as the benefits, and that the benefits through the legislature have gone from 55 to 57 to around 75%. Again, that wasn't the firefighters making that decision. That was the legislature making decisions. And since that time, there has been inflation and cost of living. And speaking to inflation and the COLA, it's been a 3%, but inflation hasn't been 3%. Inflation's been 6, 7, 9% at times. So the COLA hasn't even actually kept up with COLA. And, you know, if you were to change your job, you would perhaps take a cut in pay. But all these retirees are not changing their jobs and can't probably do another job. So they have been promised this income, and that's what they have been promised they can rely on for the retirement planning from back when maybe they did retire or before they retired to do retirement planning. And Senator Nix here, or Hicks, excuse me, my eyes aren't that good that far, suggested perhaps a lump sum payout. Well, just as our people who took care of the retirement fund and did their best with the actuaries and the anticipated growth of 7%, that would be the same thing with all of the retirees who perhaps would have a lump sum. Not only the tax implications of receiving a lump sum, but then they would also have to expense money to maybe get a financial advisor to help them manage that fund, which may not be any better or any worse than the people who tried to take care of our funds the best that they could before. However, and Mr. Nichols brought up the good point that acquiring a large lump sum can do a better return than if everyone in the room had a small lump sum and was trying to do a return on that money. So I don't see where a lump sum, in my mind, benefits everybody individually. It's a nice idea. Thank you for bringing it forward. But I think for the retirees and the age and the spouses that will have to deal with it afterwards, many of them don't have the financial education needed. Keeping it in one pot is a better thing going forward. And I am very pleased that Sheridan, Casper, and Cheyenne are happy to get on board with continuing funding this promised pension. You also mentioned that everyone in the state, taxpayers, would need to be paying for this. Yes, myself included, and the firemen included. But everyone in the state, whether directly or indirectly, have benefited from the retired firefighters and continue to benefit. And I bet you there are some of them, if they could, would go and talk to people and say, this is what you need to do around your house to mitigate fire exposure. They would be helpful, and they take their knowledge and spread it to other people, to younger people that they have connections with. What are you doing in your house? Do you have a fire alarm? Simple things, but each one of them, I'm sure, are benefiting individuals one way or another with their knowledge. So would everybody need to pay? Yes, but everybody is benefiting, has benefited, and continues to benefit from all the firefighters. Let me see if I had anything else in my notes. And the only other thing is, and I think I did cover it, taking a cut is not an option. And keeping a promise is an option. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Lester. Any questions? Any questions? Thank you very much. That completes. Do we have anybody else in the waiting room?
Mr. Chairman, no, there's no one else in the waiting room, but we would point out in your packets, Rock Springs, the mayor of Rock Springs also provided some written testimony because they could not be here today.
I don't understand you with your face mask on. I'm sorry. Yeah, we do have, the mayor of Rock Springs has also provided written testimonies in our packets here. It's also, I think, available in the materials online. You want to read that, I encourage you to read that as well. So I think that, is there anyone else that wishes to provide public testimony this morning on this issue? Yes, sir, go ahead. We need to have you come around this way and come up here to the table, please. Push on that button and that light will turn green when it.
There we go.
There we go. It's green. Now pull it up just a little bit. So you can, all those people out in YouTube land can get benefit
Okay.
from what you have to say.
Unaccustomed to public speaking as I am, I hope I can get my point across here.
Let's start real easy. And what's your name?
Howard McDonald, 27 years with the Laramie Fire Department.
McDonald, you said?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. McDonald. We're glad to have you today. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the lady there about the family time and that sort of thing. It's a big deal. But we haven't talked a lot about the impact. And a lot of us still have house payments. We have car payments. We have expenses. And I'd like to say something about this survey that came out, this ill-thought survey that came out. I can honestly put 0 on that thing. And I think it was unfair to even ask that question. It seems like, okay, if you've got this much Social Security coming in, then we'll cut that much from your pension. That's what it feels like to a lot of us. I'm not in that position because I don't get any. But the big thing is the impact. I'm 78 years old. I don't have a whole lot of years left. When I die, my wife's going to have to sell out here in Wyoming, leave Wyoming, and go to St. Louis and live with our daughter. There again, it's the impacts. And it's a promise in the contract that the state of Wyoming has with us and should be honored. Thank you.
Mr. McDonald, anything else that's on your mind?
There might be after I leave and think about it.
Hang on with Mr. McDonald, see if anybody has any questions for you.
Okay.
So,
Any questions? Go ahead,
Mr. McDonald, we appreciate your comments that, because we want to know how many people are out there that don't have any other retirement, because that helps us understand the predicament we may be put you in. So I appreciate your comments. And by the way, your fellow associate, first of all, House Member Moniz and then Senator Moniz always did his darn best to protect Fire A while he was here, and we miss him because he's a great guy. And he's done a lot for Fire A folks while he was here. So appreciate your service and say hello to Glenn when you see him.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Is there any other public testimony this morning on this issue?
Mr. Perkins?
Well, that would be a first, Mr. Crank. If Mr. Crank, go ahead. I have no problem with that, but let's check.
Any Fire A folks that are here, follow Robbie and I to some room we'll find and we'll talk.
I think the old tutorial chamber is open because we set that up so people could hear what's going on in here. So I think that room is open if you would like to use that one.
And
Thank
we'll
you.
help you out. We'll turn on the microphones so they can hear everything that's going on in there. So could we make sure we got staff down there to help them? So does everyone hear what Pat, he wants all you guys to go down the stairs and into the room on that side of the building so he can kind of have a chat with everybody. Any other public comments? Anyone want some comments before you go on? That's his decision.
I'll give you 30 seconds because you already had one. We usually only give one.
To speak to the impact, I think the other thing to keep in consideration is that a lot of these guys, Medicaid may not cover insurance. And so some of them are on the
Medicare.
opens. Yes, sir. Thank you. Medicare. But some of them are in the marketplace, which I don't know if any of y'all have tried to buy insurance, but it is expensive. And along those same lines, they can only make a certain amount to benefit from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wyoming. While decreasing it may help, it kind of takes that fund from somewhere else. So I think thinking along those lines as well, that impact, you never know what's going to come up. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2019. And that had a severe impact. And thank God that they had this pension to help with those other expenses. But they're all unfortunately getting up in age that things are going to start creeping up. And I think the insurance is something to also think about. Not only the standard bills, but we also have to pay for medical insurance to some regard. Thank you.
Thank you. And one thing about your legislatures, we understand that too. We don't get insurance through the state. So we are all out there either getting insurance through employers or for our private marketplaces as well. So we understand that part of it very well. Thank you. Thanks for bringing that.
And for the folks that you kind of hear the banter between Mr. Crank and I, we used to be law partners together. So we're good friends and we were in law school together. But when you get two lawyers in the room, it's almost impossible for us not to argue together sometimes and share perspectives from both sides. But
my experience is if you have two lawyers, you probably have 3 to 4 opinions in a room. But anyway, and I are one. So anyway, yeah. All right. Thank you very much. we're going to take a little break here for about 10 minutes and we'll resume our work. Thank you.
They say any town that's too small to support one lawyer can only support two.
One, yes, there, or, yeah.
Springs' letter. We pay what we're at. It's kind of a contrast to.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Hi, how are you? You're still.
You guys taking off? It's most crazy.
No, no. We're.
All right, it's good to see you.
You see, To order. Now, we've got one item left on Fireman 2, which was just committee directive, and we'll come back to that later. Working groups still doing their thing, and, think about that. And we may come back with some committee directives to staff a little bit later. Please remind me so we don't forget to come back to that in case I gloss over that later on. The next item is item 4, Department of Revenue implementation of monthly collection of ad valorem taxes. We see the people behind the masks. Okay. We've got Brenda and Greg here. So please welcome, and we're glad to have you again. And go ahead and let's get started. Oh, it's that Brenda. I didn't recognize you with your mask on. Okay. Hi, Brenda.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue, and it's a pleasure to be here to discuss this topic today. I've tried to get up to speed on where things, you may recall, in March of 2020, I retired. Didn't keep my thumb on the heartbeat of the legislature for the entire time, but certainly have had an opportunity. I will say that the recorded committee meetings is a benefit not only to the public, but just to have that historical ability to go back and listen into the discussions and the concerns. So with that, I have with me today Craig Grenvik, the Mineral Administrator for the Department of Revenue, and he's been working diligently on this statutory change. We thank you for this opportunity to talk about the implementation of House Bill 159 and Senate File 60. As stated by Treasurer Joel Shell during your last meeting, this is the most significant change in tax policy and administration in years. So due to that, there are a lot of moving parts. I am really pleased with the progress that has been made since that July 19th meeting where you folks discussed it. I'd like to start this morning with our letter that was in response to your questions. That was dated July 19th. Hopefully you have that before you. So right after that July 19th meeting, yes, Mr. Chairman, Craig Grenvik reached out to our vendor to work towards putting together a Gantt chart that you see attached. I know it's 8 pages, it's fairly detailed, but I wanted the committee to recognize the thought process that has gone into every aspect of this major change in tax policy. The document is as of August 25th. And I'd like to note some of the things that has occurred since that time period. First and foremost, we have sent letters out to all of the producers in the state of Wyoming, both the annual filers, the monthly filers, that outlines the statutory changes, administration, the changes in how they're going to report and pay, and the timelines that go along with that. So they have all been notified. We've also posted that on our Department of Revenue website. In addition to that, we have discussed and finalized both the format of the invoice that we'll be preparing for those producers once they report to us. And we've also spent time putting together both a hard copy transmittal form that will be accompanying the funds once we collect the money and then we distribute it to county treasurers across the state. There will be both a hard copy document and then also an Excel spreadsheet that will identify the producer, the mineral type, the valuation, the mill levy, the calculation of those tax dollars, and then also any penalty or interest that we collected as well. So county treasurers can be confident when they distribute those funds, what entities should be getting each piece. So that's all been done since that July 19th, not to mention the ongoing work on the development of the program. One of the key components, and Craig mentioned this when he testified in July, the decision was made to basically expand the capabilities of our severance tax reporting system. That decision in itself moved this along. The biggest piece for your consideration as Appropriations Committee was the funding piece. Because we were able to expand the program that we currently use for severance tax, we were able to tap in to an existing maintenance contract that already had a provision for 4,000 hours of programming that is related to statutory changes. So that in itself meant we didn't have to go for another contract. We didn't have to have another statement of work. We could focus on the task at hand as opposed to jumping through all those legal hoops. So that in itself brought us further. The other thing that it means is the $274,000 that accompanied and was designated through Senate File 60 from the LISRA. We will revert that. We aren't going to be able, or won't need to tap into any of those funds either. So we were really pleased with that. It should be noted that we're meeting with our vendor twice a week now to ensure that we're keeping on track. And you see through that Gantt chart that we've got a very aggressive timeline. And when I conclude my comments, if you have questions specific to that timeline, I'd be happy to go back over that, but I think it speaks fairly clearly. One of the things that we focused on over the last month and a half is communication with the stakeholders. Everybody has questions about the unknown. What am I responsible for? So to start that discussion back and forth, we have had multiple discussions via the phone with treasurers, assessors, industry representatives. We've met with Jeremiah Ryman with the County Commissioners Association. Craig put together a presentation and spoke with the Petroleum Association of Wyoming at a recent meeting. We are scheduled to present before the county treasurers, and also I'll be participating on a panel discussion during the general session of the Wyoming Association of County Officers later this month. So as you can see, there are a lot, this legislation has a lot of fingers out there and it affects a lot of people, and it's best that we keep those communications. One of the things that was an unknown was the delayed payment. You may all recall that delayed payment that says 2020 mineral production, the second half, which would be 2020 production is 2021 taxes. So the second half of 2021 property taxes via that legislation can be delayed for all the monthly filers. Annual filers don't have that opportunity. So the 2020 production, which is certified and then becomes 2021 property taxes, the second half of 2021 property taxes may be delayed according to Senate File 60. In addition, we've got all of 2021 production, which would be 2022 property taxes that may be delayed as far as payment. Well, once we have the 2021 mill levies, so county commissioners adopt mill levies, county assessors by August 10th are required to report that to the state board. So around the middle of August, we knew the 2021 mill levies. And we also knew the mineral value that was certified. We also had the ability to subtract out the annual filers So we knew exactly what the maximum amount of delayed payment of taxes. Some use the term deferred, delayed. It's just that we're not getting those tax dollars in the normal time period. But we were able to calculate what those numbers are, and I'd like to share those with you this morning. So these numbers that I'm giving you, we did not include special districts because special districts, it was just too complex to get those numbers for the committee today. But let's look at the big buckets. Total for counties, 41,676,000 is the amount that will be delayed payment, or the maximum amount of delayed payment. For the school foundation, 42,597,000 plus. For the 6 mills, for the 6 mills, 21,300,000 approximately. For the 25 mills that goes to K through 12, 88,745,000. Then when you add the BOSIS, the bond indebtedness for K through 12, the total figure for 2021 taxes is 158,774,000 plus some change. Let's talk about community colleges that they levy the 4 mills. That would be about $3.4 million statewide. When you look at all of the mills that the community colleges levy, it's a little over $5 million statewide. So the total amount of tax that can be delayed under this legislation for 2021 taxes, again, to reiterate, that's only half of the mineral taxes that are collected. And it's excluding special districts, 205,485,000 approximately that could be delayed. Now, I would not be telling the whole story if I didn't mention that starting in January of 2022, producers will be reporting and will be collecting those 2022 taxes during that same time period that the counties and the taxing entities would have typically been getting the second half of the 2021 taxes. So we don't have a crystal ball. We put it in the budget. It did not get funded. So what we did is the next best thing. We took our 2021 production numbers and we looked at January, February, and March, because January, February, and March of 2022 will be the months that we'll be able to distribute prior to that July 1 fiscal year cutoff for 2022. Using 2021 production, we've calculated that it's approximately $160 million as an estimate, as a very rough estimate, because we don't really know what 2022 production is going to be. But that was the legislature's intent, that we're going to delay second half payment, but keep in mind these entities, we're going to go ahead and have them acquire those funds on that monthly payment. So there's a couple things that we really don't have any way to include in those calculations. First of all, we don't know the amount of taxes that won't be delayed by producers. That won't be delayed. So even though the legislature allows producers to delay that second half payment, they don't have to. They may go ahead and pay it. And if it is, then that'll be distributed to the taxing entities. The other thing we don't know are those companies that county commissioners will grant an exemption to the monthly payment statute. So within an alternative arrangement, which means they will continue to pay using the current statutory where values are certified, first half of prior year production taxes is paid no later than November 10th, and the second half is paid by May 10th of the following year. So we do have counties that have notified us that they do have some producers that have asked for that exemption from the monthly payment. As of today, we only have 2 counties that have granted those exemptions to companies, and those being Sublette and Lincoln. But there's no way for us to know how many counties will grant that in the future. I will tell you that our program, basically, you know, the in the weeds mechanics of it, when a producer reports, we know by mineral group where that production is located at. And so we'll be able to identify which counties where they shouldn't be giving us money on a monthly basis and which counties they will. So just because a producer gets an exemption in one county does not necessarily mean they get an exemption in all 23 counties or the counties that they have production. So that's another piece of that. The other part that we need to keep in the back of our mind is that all of 2021 production outside of the annual filers, but all of that 2021 production can also delay payment over that 12-year time period that was established in the legislation. We don't have any way of determining what that amount is, but we felt that the best way to look at it was to look at what would have been deferred using the first 3 months of 2021. And it appears that approximately $411 million. In addition to the 205 that I talked about, that is second half 2021 taxes. That is approximately the maximum amount of tax deferral or delayed payment that is possible under this legislation. Now with that, I'd like to turn more to the administrative aspects.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just before we get past this exemption piece, when on Sublette and Lincoln and others, did they grant it to all producers, or do they have the option of just granting it to producers that make the request?
Chairman Perkins, Representative Larson, just specific producers that requested it. The legislation has some criteria, including public meetings and establishing criteria. And I'm not sure, Craig, perhaps you could help me with the number of companies that those 2 counties have granted.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think it's so far just 6 producers, but I'm sure there'll be more closer we get to 6.
Thank you, Craig. With that, I'd like to talk about the statutory.
Before you move on, so with the math that's being deferred, but then you start the monthly payment that comes in. So, and I understand that you don't know all those numbers, but roughly what's the net? Have you done any guess on net?
The only, Mr. Chairman, the only guess that we've got is just looking at those 2021.
Right, for the first 3
submittals.
months, and so when you look at the net now, what's that number roughly?
I would not want to venture a guess on the net, knowing that we're looking into the future, into 2022 production. And the other piece is we know that we're only going to get 3 months of production in that time period before July 1 of 2022. So you're going to lose in that time period. That's where you're going to really see the loss in revenue coming in. But once we get past that first year, then that distribution will be on track. You know, you'll have 12 months distribution every year. And I think that that will work for the taxing entities. They're not going to have the confidence in their budget amounts as they have in the past because they won't know the assessed value, but at least they'll have income coming in on a monthly basis. But as far as that net out, I apologize, I don't I don't have that number or feel comfortable providing a number.
And just going back, you said that it's the combination of the, I thought you said it was the combination, it was 411 million plus the
205.
the 12 plus the 205. So 660 million or so.
As an estimate that could be delayed, has the legal ability of delaying payment over that 12-year time period as statute provides for.
Okay, thank you.
And that's all taxing entities excluding special districts. So turning to the administration, this committee asked during the July 19th meeting if there were some statutory provisions that needed to be clarified. And with the communication with the stakeholders over the past 2 months, we did find at the Department of Revenue that there were some language updates that we believe would make it very clear as to when, example, what's the trigger for the collection of penalty and interest, those types of things. And we have crafted an amendment. We have shared that with some industry folks. We've also shared it with county treasurers, both supportive of that. I'd be happy to share that with the committee today, or if you prefer to have another committee, revenue committee, or someone take on that responsibility, consider that, that'd be fine. You heard testimony back in July that both the industry and the counties have some suggested items that they would like amended. We've already been discussing those, and we could put them all together in one bill if that's the pleasure of the committee. I believe that between now and the Waco meetings that are in September, we plan to have all of that worked out and to be in agreement on what that should be. I do want to talk about what that amendment would do as far as the timing, just for clarification. So let's put ourselves in January of 2022. So we already have statutory language that severance tax has to be reported to the department and has historically by March 25th, which is the second month following the month of production. So our statutes, both for the ad valorem piece and the severance tax piece, state that producers shall report to the Department of Revenue the 25th of the month of the second month following the month of production. So January production. March 25th, producers have to report to the department. Between March 25th and April 9th, the Department of Revenue will be looking at those reports, identifying the tax districts that production occurred in, identifying the tax district for the new production that we haven't got on file. So we'll have about ends up being 12, 13 days, depending on weekends and how things fall, to make sure that we have that information correct. At that point, then we can create an invoice. So on April 10th, we will be sending out an invoice to all the producers. Again, this is for January production. We'll ask that those producers remit payment no later than April 25th of that month. The beauty again of this is producers don't have to change their system. They don't have to change the way they're reporting. They just are going to get an invoice from us that identifies that tax. We send that out. They remit payment by April 25th. We process those payments and then we forward all those funds no later than April 30th to the county treasurers, who then can distribute that money to all the taxing entities. We know that the penalty and interest provision under this amendment that we would like considered, it makes it very clear that the trigger for penalty and interest is after that April 25th, basically the third month following the month of production. The 25th of the month of the third month following production, taxes will be delinquent and a penalty will be assessed. We believe that that makes it very, very clear for those companies.
Representative Larson.
Thank you. So following that, remind me, so you're gonna have the invoices to the producers by when in April, the 9th?
Mr. Chairman, we'll generate those invoices, Representative Larson, and on the 9th, and then we'll email those to producers by the 10th.
So, okay, and so, Mr. Chairman, so then they'll have through the end of the month to make their payment. Anything after that is delinquent.
Mr. Chairman, they'll have until the 25th. So
25th.
we're agreeing to do some of that legwork to identify tax district and the amount of value per tax district. So we're asking for part of that 30 days. So we're asking till the 10th, and then we're giving them 15 days to remit payment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Continue, Brandon.
So with that, I think I've covered all of the topics that I felt were identified during that July 19th discussion. And if there are any questions, of course, I'll be happy to answer those. One other offer that I have for you folks. We would like to demonstrate the process from what does it look like on our system for a producer to go in and report? How does our system generate the invoice? How do we then collect that payment? And then how do we then transmit that payment to the county treasurers across the state? And what information is included in that transmittal? I will tell you, our plan is it's going to be a spreadsheet. The treasurers are going to have a hard copy. They're also going to have a spreadsheet. So they have digital data that they can incorporate into their own systems. But I'd like to offer a chance to demonstrate that to you folks. We believe we'll have it in a test environment and ready to go by the first part of December. We already have treasurers and industry reps that are going to be assisting us in that testing phase. But if this committee has about 20 minutes that they'd like to see that actually, I don't know about you, but I would want to see it working. And we'd be happy to show that.
Mr. Vice President.
So along those lines, when will the county treasurers be able to see this prior to our JAC meeting? I'd really like to get their input on that prior to them getting their first look at the same time we do.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, we're working daily with county treasurers across the state. We've already provided some of them with the format of those reports. Again, we'll be meeting specifically with the County Treasurers Association in September at their meeting to answer any questions and present them with the information. And we'll also share that with all of the county elected officials during that general session. But we want their input through each and every step. Fortunately, our vendor has been excellent on the modifications that we've asked for. But like I said, we've had at minimum 5 different county treasurers that we've been on the phone as this process has moved along. So I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Chairman, the question is will the treasurer have had an opportunity to view this rollout?
Yes.
Prior to your presentation? Because what I don't want to do is you have a presentation and then have a lot of treasurers sitting in the back wanting to come up and say, well, we don't like that, or we like, I just want to make sure that happens before you come to us. Is that a yes or a no?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, yes. And if you look at the Gantt chart, you'll see that we'll be providing information to the treasurers starting in November.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Any further questions? Mr.
Any
Chairman?
further questions from the committee?
Thank you for the time.
Thank you for your update. We appreciate your work. This is it's going to be an interesting next 8 months, 9 months.
It is.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Let's go, Chair.
So a couple questions, Brenda. How are your staffing? Are you guys doing all right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, co-chairman. Right now, we're doing fine. What this has resulted in is all hands on deck, in that the staff of the Mineral Tax Division and Administrative Services, keeping in mind Administrative Services are the folks that are going to take that money in and make sure it's logged accurately within the Wolf system and distributed accurately. I will tell you that everyone is expanding their knowledge of how the ad valorem tax structure is. And we know that posting of, basically we've calculated approximately 700 to 800 additional payments on a monthly basis that we'll absorb. At this point, I believe our staffing levels are sufficient. I'll visit with you again in July of 2022, when we'll have about 3 months collection under our belt. I appreciate the question.
Well, and
Actually, we'll visit in December of
Yeah.
2021.
and maybe again in January, maybe again in February. And that's kind of my point, is that always feel free to contact us when things go wrong, or when, you know, the bucket becomes too full, because we don't want you to get behind the ball, and want to provide the flexibility when you think you need help, that it's there in front of you, and you don't have to wait for us to meet again next year in order to accommodate it, because it's that important that we do this.
I do appreciate that, Chairman Nicholas. You know, we lost a position during the COVID-19 reductions in the Mineral Tax Division, another one in Property Tax, another one in Administrative Services. So, you know, we truly are trying to utilize that lack of staff to look at efficiencies. And my hat's off to Mr. Grenvik for looking at how can we tap into our severance tax system and structure, and what we do have as far as functionality and capabilities and knowledge base within our staff, and how can we build on that. And if it weren't for that suggestion, the story today would be completely different.
Tell me, how's the friendliness of your current computer systems, and where are they at in terms of usability, functionability, and being able to do this transfer?
Very great.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, our staff is very comfortable with this proposal. And from the industry standpoint, what Director Henson has said, industry is not having to change any of their reporting. The only thing that they'll have to adapt to are these monthly invoices. MBS, our vendor, we've worked with them for well over a decade. They're very familiar with our severance and ad valorem tax system. So these really aren't any type of major changes, or got to tap into a new knowledge base. So we're comfortable that this can get done.
So follow up, Mr. Co-Chair. So what, I mean, I think you're going to learn things, obviously, in terms of what the delays, how much it is, and what those impacts are. And the industry is going to learn how to maximize their position as we move forward, you know, to their greatest advantage. As we learn those things, then what I hope you will do is come back and report to us and saying, here's what they're doing. Here's what, you know, take it back to the act and say, and show us the tweaks that we can to correct it, to facilitate it, you know, to make, so we can maximize what we're trying to do at the same time. And so as this thing rolls out, I just continue to keep us informed so we can help you and make sure we get as much collected as possible. So.
And Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the county treasurers out there and the enormous task that they have before them. You know, we're going to collect from those producers. But then once we send that money to them, they've got that responsibility of distributing that money, reconciling after the mill levies are set the following year, reconciling that amount, making refunds or billing for additional funds, keeping track of those that commissioners have exempted. Quite honestly, this truly is a partnership. We've all got our parts to play and responsibilities, but if any of those pieces are overlooked, we fail our citizens. And so I just want to make sure that the committee recognizes that we understand the challenges before county treasurers right now as well.
Thank you. Brenda, to follow up on your question, you guys are working on the tweaks or the fixes on the bill. I would suggest that you get those to us as well as revenue and minerals, and then we'll sort out between, but I think it's gonna be important for all three committees to understand what those are, and we'll sort out which committee takes those on, you know, or if anyone does, but I'm assuming that they will, but let's do
And
it that
Mr.
way.
Chairman, I do have copies of the timeline amendment that we've proposed and shared with industry and the counties. I'd be happy to leave them with the secretary.
Yeah, please do, and let's make, yeah, like I said, let's make sure we get those to the minerals and revenue, because they've all, in fact, most of this is the chairman of revenue's fault anyway.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I am scheduled to have a conference call with both chairs of revenue later this week, and definitely offer our services as far as reporting back to them as well.
Okay. Thank you. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions for these good folks from Revenue Committee? All right, thank you very much. We'll go ahead. We've got Brandon Craig. We got, is there anybody with comment on item number 4? We're on item number 4. Department of Revenue implementation of monthly collection of ad valorem taxes. Do you have anybody in the waiting room, Elizabeth? All right, we'll go ahead. Okay, there we are. Thank you. Jeremiah, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the County Commissioners Association. I don't want to take up much of your time, but I just wanted to provide a couple of comments here. First off, the movement that we've made since that May timeframe is considerable. It is a much different conversation than we were having there. It's not as contentious. We're working through issues. We are finding solutions, and I really compliment the Department of Revenue and all of our partners in this process. It is a good thing. I did want to provide just a couple pieces of clarification quickly. There was some talk about the exemptions. It is true that there are 2 counties that have granted exemptions. Sublette County actually granted an exemption to 9 of their producers. So I don't have numbers for Lincoln County, but it is a number slightly higher than 6. We do have at least 1 county that has made the decision not to grant exemptions formally, and that's Carbon County. They just felt it was more appropriate to pull off the Band-Aid and let's move forward and keep all the producers onto this new system. So they're there. I've been told informally from at least 3 other counties, in particular our 3 largest or 3 of our largest, that they do not intend to grant exemptions. And those are the Converse counties of the world, the Campbell counties of the world. That may change, but informally I've been told they don't intend to offer that. Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate the consideration of amendments. We will have other topics that are of interest to all of the stakeholders, and we have a great commitment amongst all of us to work on that collaboratively and try and bring you a package that we all agree upon, so that there's no disagreement in any elements of this. What Director Henson has brought forward is certainly something that it looks to be correct and something that we would be supportive of. But there are some other provisions that we need to dig into. The loan provision is one of those. And certainly the data that she's provided will help us to understand that. What we know right now is that the money that was put into that loan package is probably insufficient to cover the entirety of the need. And that's no criticism to anybody. We're making projections off of unknown data at the time. That said, I'm not here to bring a number because we also have counties that have indicated they don't intend to take a loan for any variety of reasons. Again, two of the largest, Converse and Campbell, informally have said they don't intend to take that loan, and that affects that number that we might need to come back to you related to. We also have issues with the annual filers in House Bill 159, the delinquency penalties. There's an issue there that the treasurer's brought up to you previously. We also have a consideration that is important to my members about the sale or transfer of assets that happen relative to those companies in that 13-year payback or that concurrent payment period. And so, again, we're working collaboratively trying to bring that to you. We hope to bring a broader package soon. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions, but appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate your attendance today. Questions for Mr. Ryman? Thank you, Jeremiah. Any other public comment on item number 4, Department of Revenue implementation of monthly collection of ad valorem taxes? Any other public comment? We'll go ahead and close off public comment then. Committee, anything on item 4 comes to mind at this point in time? We'll circle back again later this afternoon. Next item on our agenda is item number 5, Public Works contracting. And so we've got our good working group. Who is your spokesman? Who's the spokesman? What you miss a meeting? Okay.
I did.
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This is an update on the effort to look at the gap we have in our public contracting process, where sometimes we feel that contractors are perhaps excluded due to qualification requirements. And we had talked about perhaps putting in place a process of pre-qualifying contractors. So our follow-up from the last meeting is Representative Stith, Representative Stimson, and I joined a conference call with the Department of Transportation, Department of Construction, then our county commissioners and association of municipalities, and then our contractor associations to look at that. And the question really was is how does the Department of Transportation and the Department of State Construction handle the qualifications for bids? And what we really saw was about 180-degree difference in doing that. The Department of Transportation has a process that they have bidders pre-qualified to do road work, and then the Department of Construction was saying, we don't do the pre-qualification, we'll take all comers because we really do not have enough people bidding. And so the end result was, then how do we go back and try to address and make sure that contractors are having the opportunity to submit a bid and that their bids are being considered. And upon some conversation, what we've settled on and are having a draft bill made is that we will have a bill that puts forth the requirement of a public entity in the event that they deny a contractor the opportunity to bid, that at the time they deny it, they have to explain why. And likewise, when there are bids received, you'll see in the bidding process that the entity has the right to reject any or all of the bids. And in those statutes, we had put the same requirement in the event that there is a bidder whose bid is rejected. Maybe they forgot an addendum or something in the bidding process, or the whole bunch is rejected because the prices, because of money, that they would have to, the public entity would then have to respond that the bids were being rejected and the reason for that. And so we're looking at the statutes to see where those pieces would fit into, but Mr. Chairman, that really is the summary.
All right, thank you. Representative Stith, did you have, what did he forget?
Mr. Chairman, I think Representative Larson adequately captured the essence of our work. Right now, if you get disqualified as a potential bidder on a project, the municipality is not obligated to tell you why. You just get disqualified and you don't know. The proposed draft that we're working on would require the public entity to give a list of reasons of why you got disqualified. The idea being that that helps the bidder who can't bid, the contractor who doesn't get to bid, they can improve for next time. So I think it's pretty small bore solution. I was advocating for a broader solution. During our meeting, we did have agreement from the Wyoming Association of Municipalities and the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. They did not object to the idea of saying that if YDOT says you're good enough to build a road, that Green River should allow you to build a road as well, or street, and should not disqualify you. Our working group did not have consensus on that. I think we could add that to the bill, and that would be a step forward. The other members think that that's not necessary. So that's where we stand. But I think we've made good progress, and we're doing work that I think it advances the ball to solve this problem of artificial disqualification.
Thank you. Well, we all agreed it wouldn't be any fun. So Representative Stith, go ahead and turn your mic back on. I don't know if anybody's watching, but Representative Stith's picture was up right behind him when he was speaking, but it's a mirror image. So when he had raised this hand, the one on the other one would go up. It was kind of interesting.
Raise your right hand.
Anyway, thank you. Any questions by the committee with respect to on the working group?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
In the minutes of the July 19 meeting, and I was not there for that meeting, but there was a presentation by the Association of General Contractors, and they talked about several instances of overly restrictive requirements, pre-qualification requirements, and the minutes recite that Co-Chairman Perkins requested written examples referenced in the presentation. Have we received those?
Excuse me, Representative.
There's actually just one example cited, and it was within the Water Development Commission. And I took that assignment to investigate that. And I sent you an email 3 or 4 days ago that outlined that project and what happened. It really was an anomaly. And we're really very comfortable as we've interviewed the different department heads. We really like what they're doing with pre-qualifications because they're very respectful of the contractors. They're very respectful of all the parties, the municipalities and the counties. And so even though my colleague desired a stronger, broader piece of legislation, we really came to the conclusion that pre-qualifications is such a broad area. Literally every entity out there has a different type of a project that would be very difficult. In fact, we felt like we would actually put ourselves in a bad position to try to define that a little better. But to answer your question, Senator, we resolved that and it was taken care of and we're good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't make the connection between the minutes and your email. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
So we anticipate having the draft completed and presented to you at our next meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and at this point, if there's nothing else from members of the committee, we'll go ahead and is there any public comment? I think we do have a couple of people who signed up in the room. We've got at least signed up. We've got a Katie Legursky and a Mark Madsen. Are you pointing at the room or are you pointing at your screen?
I apologize. I'm admitting Mr. Madsen now.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Mark Madsen, AGC of Wyoming. And just generally speaking, I agree with all the comments that we've heard. So really, I just stand for questions. We generally support it. I love the idea of, a description of why, as many could tell you, I'm actually an engineer. So we certainly put together pre-qualifications, and the whole idea behind those is to make sure people who are chasing that work are, really good at doing that, right? That's a public safety 101 kind of scenario. Because you define the reason why you said a certain company couldn't do that, I think that creates the dialogue scenario to make it fair. And I would just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mattson. Any questions for Mr. Mattson? Thank you, Mr. Mattson. Is Ms. Legursky in the room? No? Okay. Is there anybody in this room that would like to make a public comment on item number 5, Public Works Contracting? Come on up. If anybody else is here to do that, come up and take a chair as well, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, David Fraser, Executive Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I also don't really have many comments other than to indicate our support for the summary that was given by Representative Larson. We did have some concerns with the when pre-qualification was part of the discussion. We did have some concerns about the mechanics of that, which are moot under the previous proposal. But of course, if that does come back into the conversation, we'll want to probably have some comments about that. But the bill that is being prepared that Representative Larson described, we do support. We think it's fair if somebody's disqualified that they have an opportunity to know why. With that, I would stand down and take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Grayson. We appreciate your attendance today. Any questions for Mr. Grayson? Thank you, Mr. Grayson. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. Bill May asked me to attend. I'm Jennifer Coast from the University of Wyoming, and I just wanted to also express our support for the measure. We really like to help develop contractors, and that's a great idea to let them know why they might not have been pre-qualified.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ghost. We appreciate your time today. Any questions for Ms. Coates? Thank you. Any other public comment on item number 5, Public Works Contracting? Any other comment? Okay.
Comments, but I would offer.
Turn your mic on. Oh, there you go. All right, you got it.
I would offer any explanation to the example that I believe Senator Kinski was referring to. I think Representative Simpson responded, but if there's any questions for me, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from Gephardt? There appearing to be none. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Anyone else this morning on this issue? All right, we'll go ahead and close off public comment on item number 5. Any comments or committee discussion directives at this time? And we'll circle back on all these today. Are you there for item 6? Or are you still on item 5? Okay, we'll go ahead and move that. I'm not that bright, so sometimes I don't keep it very well. So we'll go ahead and move to item 6, Water Development Commission Projects Update. I think we have this handout here. And so we will turn that over to, you're first on the list, Representative Simpson. So as chairman of the Select Water Committee, and then you've got your right arm there, which is actually, I guess, your left arm. But anyway, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Representative Evan Simpson from Lincoln County. I'm wearing my Legislative Select Water Committee Chairman hat today. I have with me Director Brandon Gephardt, who is the Director and leader of the Wyoming Water Development Office program. Not only is he responsible for his office and employees, but he's also responsive to the Wyoming Water Development Commission, a 10-person governor-appointed commission that oversees his activities there. And by the way, members, we really have a good relationship with the Wyoming Water Development Commission. Right now, we're good friends with them. We associate, we communicate really well, and we really feel good about the relationship between the Select Water Committee and the Commission at this time. Director Gephardt, would you mind introducing your colleagues behind us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I've got the head of our planning division, Mr. Barry Lawrence, the head of our construction division, Bill Brewer, and the head of our dams and reservoir division, Jason.
Mr. Chairman, I've gotten to know these gentlemen over the years, and they're very, very competent. I really enjoy working with them. So the reason we're here today, our last meeting, we invited members of the SLIB and DEQ to report to us about ongoing infrastructure projects in the state. It generated considerable interest by the committee, and you were interested in knowing specifically how many water improvement projects are there out there? How many are in the queue, and what dollar amount are we talking about? Because you're interested in whether or not we should be looking at some of those with the RPA money as a possible funding source. And so with that in mind, with Director Gephardt's assistance, we've prepared this list of projects that you have in front of you. Feel free to glance down through those and see if you've got any in your back door. Water development account number 1 is basically new construction. Most municipalities and water districts fall into that category, and that's why you see mostly cities and improvement districts. They're on that list. So the ones that are in the queue that will be requesting funds in the next few years, it totals $99 million of municipal types of projects. The next group down is water development account number 2. We call this the rehabilitation program. And that means that if there's an existing pipe in the ground that's worn out, we're going to replace it. Mostly these are irrigation projects, but you'll notice a few in there. The Casper projects are worn out municipal projects that need to be replaced. And so they somewhat separate themselves, but not necessarily. We do have municipal projects in that second one. As we turn the page over, you'll notice that there's $164 million of projects that have been identified. These are projects that have been through the level 1 and level 2 studies that will be requesting level 3, which is construction monies in the near future.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you. Representative Simpson, on the rehabilitation project, on those reservoirs, are those reservoirs strictly irrigation, or are they any of them municipal water as well?
Our account number 3 that we're going to go on into is pure reservoir construction. Account number 2 has some projects on it that are dam related, and they're rehabilitating existing dams, and that's why they're in this category.
I understand that, but my question is, I don't know the reason for the reservoirs. Are these reservoirs in water 2, Mr. Chairman? Sorry, are the reservoirs in water 2 for irrigation purposes, or are they supplying domestic water source? Do you see what I'm asking?
Director Gephardt, would you like to address that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, I believe that the identified projects on this list are other than the Casper Reservoir, which is a kind of a water tank, not necessarily a dam and reservoir, but most of these are for irrigation facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman, the third account.
Wait a second. We do have we have another question from a good representative from Sweetwater County.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Simpson, I see these projects are listed in alphabetical order. My guess is that some projects might be more important than others. Is there a rubric for determining what's higher priority? Like, for example, the La Prelle Dam rehabilitation, alphabetically, it's in the middle of the pack, but it seems like it might be a higher priority than some of the other projects, or the Goshen District, Irrigation District tunnel repairs could be higher priority. I mean, I don't know. Is there a method you've got, or do you just list these alphabetically? Or
Mr. Chairman, we certainly do have priorities, and we have an entire book of priorities. For today's discussion, we just wanted to give you a feel for the bulk of the volume of projects that are going to be in front of us in the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator.
So Representative, the numbers that I'm seeing here, is that the total project cost, but behind the scenes, some of that project cost is going to be borne, for instance, by a municipal rate hike, maybe a local cap tax, maybe federal revolving funds or USDA funds? Or is this 10 million that the entire project cost, and the expectation is that's entirely coming out of water development funds? In other words, is there some other sources of funds that we're not seeing here or implicitly here?
Mr. Chairman, that's a really good question. These are total project costs. When they actually apply for level 3 construction, there might be multiple funding agencies that would be involved, including federal and other state programs. Most of the level 2 do not qualify for state revolving loan funds. Those are more adept to account number 1, but account number 2, the irrigation projects quite often have federal elements in them.
Follow on, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Senator King.
So, and forgive me if I'm going to plow ground that's already been covered, but my first meeting of this group, there was some angst over, are all these folks, do we have a policy that requires these folks to go out and seek other funding sources before they come to us? And the answer was, well, we're a lot easier to deal with than getting federal grants and other sources of funding, or passing a cap tax and that sort of thing. So we're the first go-to. So there was some discussion that perhaps there should be criteria that they've got to exhaust all their other funding sources before tapping into the water development account, if they have potential other funding sources. Is that something that's already been done, or is that a discussion that just kind of petered out after that?
Mr. Chairman, that has not been done. It is not a requirement for our program at this time, but it's certainly something that we can investigate. A lot of times the folks will come in with funding partners. One of the things we've done, particularly with a lot of the projects we see in account 1, is we will not offer any loan portion. So typically the maximum that we would award would be 67% of the total project cost. And then they're required to go find the other 33%. But as far as an application to our program, we do not have criteria to require them to exhaust all other funding opportunities at this time.
Mr. Chairman, one more follow on. When I was mayor of Sheridan and we'd go before SLIB, they would always look at our rate structure and see how we compared to other municipalities and other enterprise funds. And the expectation was that you were going to be in that upper somewhere. If you were in the lowest quartile, there was an expectation you were going to raise those to help fund the project cost. Do you look at the rate structure of these applicants compared to whether they have the potential to tap the ratepayers a little bit more than they are?
Mr. Chairman, that is part of the application, but it is not typically part of our recommendations for funding. One of the things that we find difficult when we review these is what is their equation to develop that number? And we see different equations and different formulas for how people provide us that information. So unless it was a common and consistent methodology to tell us what their ratepayers pay, it becomes difficult for us to compare apples to apples. And so we would have to develop something that would be to provide that apples to apples comparison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other questions? Go ahead, excuse me, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a follow-up on Representative Stiff's question about prioritization. and I don't need it today, but I'd really be interested in understanding the methodology behind the prioritization to get a sense, especially when you look at water 3, where there's a significant disparity between funds available and projects delineated. It would be valuable information.
Yes, and Mr. Chairman, if I may start an explanation on that. For our program, we are, I call it a sponsor-driven program. So these entities bring a project application to us. We currently don't have a system where we go out and have this list and then we prioritize. The priorities come after these applications are made to us. We see the dollar amount that is requested and the dollar amount that we feel comfortable allocating. And then if need be, then we compare the applications that we get in any given year to each other, and that's when these priorities come in. But we do not have a statewide priority program for all of these projects right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you considered creating that statewide evaluation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and one of the projects that we're conceptualizing and will possibly put out this year would be a study to start off with irrigation, critical irrigation infrastructure to do just that. It would be a state-led project that we go out and we identify all the critical or as much critical infrastructure as we can and develop a statewide prioritization. So that is something that we are investigating and pursuing currently.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice President. Uh-oh, there's no question. I think we're going to find more information. I see what you did there. It's very clever.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, so we do have priorities established in the statutory authorization of the program, and they go through there and they say, if you're going to do thing, high priority is for multiple use projects that may include municipal, agricultural, industrial users. That's in statutes and authorizing the program. And underneath those statutes, the commission has the ability to adopt criteria, and they do that, and they adopt criteria. So you have a statutory hierarchy of establishing those priorities for eligibility to even participate in the program. Then you have additional criteria. So I'll give you an example. If you want to participate in the dam and reservoir project program for an irrigation project, it's just not all irrigation projects. You have to be a legal public entity. Reservoir has to be a minimum, I believe, 2,000 acre feet of water. So you have those criteria. They do have a priority system ranking for the small water project program. Say source water development is a high priority. Underneath that priority, the next one may be diversion structures. And then the next one underneath that may be solar wells, pipelines, and those types of things. So there's a hierarchical structure that we first do as far as the criteria is established in statutes. And it prioritizes projects eligible for those programs. Then you go through the criteria adopted to that, and through that criteria in some programs, they actually rank those projects against those. And if they don't meet any one of those 3 litmus tests, they don't get funded. So there is a process for prioritization and ranking associated with both statutes and criteria. And then in some programs, they even go a little bit further than that. So it's not just somebody shows up, we hand them out money through the water development program. Fairly rigorous test that goes through those to evaluate those projects. So I hope that helps, Mr. Chairman, for the committee to understand that process.
Anybody understand what he was talking about?
I'm kidding. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Appreciate that.
Can I throw a point of clarification for you? Let's say a municipality, let's take Rollins, for example, comes to the commission and they're having serious problems in their water system. They can't keep the pressures up. They've got people that are negative pressures, some challenges. And so they come to the commission and they ask for a level 1 study. And so the commission funds that, and we support that in each year in the legislation. And the consulting engineer has a look at that, and they look at their overall system and they determine, well, you're missing a supply line from here to here, and you need additional 200,000 gallon storage tank. You need the following fire hydrants. You need these. These are things that are required by DEQ to bring the municipality water system up to standard. So once the consultant has completed that report, there's a list of recommendations and that need to be met in order to keep them in compliance. And so our process is they work their way through to level 3. There's no prioritization for Rollins. They've already met all the criteria. We know that it's important for them to keep their water system operative. And so we just work through the process and we fund them for level 3. And so in terms of municipalities, it's scrutinized and vetted all the way through. When they're told what they have to do to fix their problems, we trust that and we proceed with helping the municipality out.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And just to add on to that, so the projects that you're looking at, these have, I believe all of these have come through our program in some fashion. And typically these comes out of our reports, and our reports do prioritize multiple projects for each entity. So that is inherent in these studies. And then that priority is usually developed with the municipality or irrigation district or entity, helping us to prioritize what their needs are. So typically when they come to us with a project, that is their high priority project. But then to compare that project to other applications within the program, as Senator Hicks illustrated, we do have the statute, but then for each of our programs, Water Development Account 1, 2, and 3, we do have a list of priorities that we grade every project. So when the time comes, we need to prioritize a project against another project in the state, we do have that list and we do put that on the recommendations to the commission and to the select board.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Senator Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to wade in, but I might make a little splash if that's okay. So I do think one other dynamic that we're seeing is the Ag Committee and Select Water have been focused on aging irrigation infrastructure because we're seeing a lot of those systems aging out, and we've seen it firsthand in some cases. And so while many times we've focused more on municipal water, we're seeing a lot of irrigation projects show up here, and that's why, because we're realizing and we're getting a handle on how much is out there because of the irrigation study or the survey that the Water Development Office put out. And that's really helping us to identify more of those projects. So that might help a little too. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Steinmetz.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, a final touch on my presentation.
Oh, you're not done yet.
I know. So water account number 3 at the bottom of your page is our dams and reservoirs projects. We have pending potentially $515 million worth of needs there. So what you don't have is the total of those 3 numbers. So let me share that with you. $778 million is what's in the queue right now for water projects. That doesn't count wastewater projects or roads or bridges. These are just water improvement projects. Roughly 60% of those are in the irrigation ag department, and roughly 40% are in the municipal and water and sewer district category. So, Mr. Chairman, with those numbers in mind, we would like some direction from you to tell us, would you like us to formulate one or more multiple bills that would at least formally grab a bunch of these and put them in writing for consideration for ARPA money?
Well, before you do that, I've got a couple of questions I want to ask. So right now, what can you take us through the 1, 2, and 3? Well, 3 is kind of a different deal, but particularly 1 and 2. What kind of a money is available? Do you see what's available coming into the biennium that we would normally see in our omnibus water bills in the various categories now?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Through the mineral severance tax that funds each of these programs, we get roughly $19.3 million a year for water development account 1. That's 12.45% of the 155 cap. And then we get roughly 3.255 million into water development account 2, which is 2.1%. And then about 775,000 into water development account 3, which is about 0.5%. Absolutely. Water development account 1 is roughly 19.3 annually. Water development account 2 is roughly 3.255 million. And then water development account 3 is 775,000 or 0.775 million.
And thank you for that. So, and out of those, you have, I think some of those, if I remember the omnibus bill, some of those are, are we funding those in multiple years, recognizing that so that when we've allocated or approved bills in past omnibus bills, are they fully funded at that time, or is some of that money allocated out of the next number of years to go to a particular project? You understand that? You understand what I'm
Yes,
driving at?
Mr. Chairman, and typically what we do is when we bring a project, the construction project, that is fully funded. But then that money is obligated, but it's spread out over years. There are instances where we will fund like a design portion before we fund the construction, but typically we fund the entire project. And
That
then
money's, it's all allocated once. You may come back for cost overruns or other issues that arise, but so it's all fully funded at that point in time. So when we look at for example, we look at the 19.3 million, that's available to do projects. You can award 19.3 million in an omnibus bill this coming February, and then you can do the same thing a year later.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I do have some numbers for our projections, which we base, our projections are the basis for what we say we have money to fund. So our projection for water development account 1 for the biennium, we anticipate roughly $34 million to be able to fund projects. For water development account 2 is roughly 13.3 million.
I'm sorry, was how much?
13.3 million. And so that would be for the next 2 years.
Okay.
So half a year, kind of what we shoot for.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just a clarification on those numbers. Are those numbers after you subtract out the funding for the board?
Mr. Chairman, they are.
And then we get a little bit of multiplier because, like you said, only 2/3 of this is 2/3 of the project price is eligible to be funded through the various accounts.
For the municipalities.
The
The other nuance to that is irrigation companies or districts, they can request a loan from us as well. So we can provide the 33% loan, which is repaid back over 20 to 40 years, whatever they choose to do.
Okay, so then, and so we've got some, like we've all talked about, there's some one-time money that looks like it's gonna be available this coming biennium. So we've got some priorities there. The other question I'd have for you is when last I checked, the infrastructure bill that Congress is battling with now, the last I knew, it does include water infrastructure. Water is included in the infrastructure bill. And I'm just wondering if as you look, or first question is, are you following the infrastructure bill? And the second part of that question then is, with the definition of what water is in the infrastructure bill, does it fit? Does it line up with partially or entirely with some of the different categories we have, such as account 1, account 2, account 3?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we are tracking that. And to your second question, it is my understanding that the money being discussed in the infrastructure bill will generally be distributed through the SRF programs, which we already get. So it's my understanding that that will just infuse the SRF program. One of the questions that we have, though, is the SRF requires a state match. And so as that increases, our state matches also potentially need to be increased as well. And I don't want to speak for State Lands or DEQ because we're a partner with them in the management of that. But I believe we have a lot of balance remaining in the SRF we already have. So that is just adding on to money that they're having trouble or we're having trouble spending, matching and spending as well. Yes.
So, so as we look at that, I mean, this is one of those things that I think that as we move forward, and we appreciate, appreciate the work you guys are doing in the background, but at the end of the day, obviously what we want to do is find the best way to multiply this the best way that we can to get as many projects done. And so I'm happy to know and anticipate that you guys are looking at that very carefully. And this could be awfully fluid through February. So I will see how stay tuned. But anyway, go ahead. We'll go Representative. We'll do it this way. We'll come back to George Washington later. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back a step. You referenced the revenue from severance tax, but I'm assuming there's other revenue streams, loan repayments, whatever. You have those numbers handy?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I do. And they are part of our projections. So the two other revenue that we look at is loan repayment and also the interest on the. So our accounts, we have a cash balance because we spend out over time. So the interest we earn on our account balance is also factored into our projections. The total numbers that I gave earlier include those interest and other, we call them. And right now for account one, we estimate that annually we get about 3.6 million in interest and loan repayment. In account two, we anticipate about 1.2 million. And then in account three, which is strictly interest earnings on cash balance, is about 2.2 million is what we project.
Thank you, Representative Schwartz. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Director. I'm a little bit confused, but you're probably right. But what I was seeing on the infrastructure bill, it looked like that they was funneling that money for water in through the SRF programs, but not necessarily requiring the loan component of it. Was I misreading that?
Mr. Chairman, I think that the loan requirement that you're referring to, that's our requirement that we have placed for our funding. Typically, I believe that the SRF has some grant, but it's a majority of that funding is a loan to those entities.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and I realize that, but this infrastructure money I thought was coming in via that avenue, but not having that requirement as part of it. But maybe I had we'll watch and see, but
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, I'm not sure if they're going to use that as grant money or continue with the traditional SRF program. I'm not clear on that.
And neither are they yet. So
I think that's right.
I guess the one other issue that we have as we do that, I mean, as you look with money that's available, and then you put the 67%, kind of limit on that, you end up with about in water account one, you end up with about $44 million of projects you can build in the next biennium when you take and add the other third that has to come on. But I mean, and then we look at the infrastructure and we look at, maybe some availability through substitution of funds or things like that in ARP.
But as we do that, what kind of capacity do we have to take on projects? Do we have any feel for what's the maximum amount that we can actually take on in moving forward, given the fact that, you know, you can only get so much done at a time, and you know, cost of materials and shortages and blah, 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 all those other things. Do we have any feel for the maximum amount of water construction types of projects we could take on in a given year?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a pretty loaded question, because I look at it from our capability as an agency, and we've got some open positions we need to fill that help us function. But I think my more of a concern would be if it's SRF, then I understand that OSLI and DEQ would have trouble administering that influx of money. But I'm also concerned about contractors and engineers that can put that to work. And I do have a big concern with that, and I don't know what that answer is, but I could see more of a bottleneck with actually getting something constructed than I can with funding.
And that's why I asked the question. Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you. So Representative Simpson, as we look at the, as you and I have talked just offline, and we talked about priorities on infrastructure, and then we talked about preservation of water rights and capturing Wyoming's water. Have you looked at these three areas and say, where do we, if we had one-time money, where's the greatest legacy that we do? Is it preservation or of existing assets, or is it to capture and preserve our water? Or do you have a feel for that?
That's a really, really good question, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, that implies that all the rest of our questions are not.
Sorry. You know, as we look around the state, you can see municipalities that have water and regions, agriculture areas. Water is critical. As I drive down I-80, places that do not have water have antelope, and that's all. And so the development of new water, to be able to use existing water rights, to be able to maximize any type of water, really is very important to our state. It really is the essence of life, water is. And so I don't know that I have a personal priority on that. I think the further development of all water projects is certainly an enhancement to our state and invaluable.
Yes, Ms. Vice President.
Task force, and we have mineral industries now that's looking at large expansion. The answer specifically Representative Larson.
Do you have your mic on? Because they can't hear you in Jackson.
Yeah. So the question is where do we prioritize? And I think to a certain degree, it's going to be basin dependent. It's going to be location and economic opportunities that present themselves. But there is a big concern with individuals, with companies within the trone industry on the reliability of future water in the Colorado River system. A long conversation with the representative of the trone industry on that, and it is a critical component for their continued expansion of trone mining in the state of Wyoming is reliability of water. Giant economic implications of sustainability and then future economic opportunity for development. But if we look right now across the state of Wyoming, where we're hydrologically challenged, it's in the eastern part of the state, primarily Laramie County, where we're seeing our largest population growth. My conversations with the Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities, potentially $125 million worth of water projects just to satisfy the current level of growth if you look out 10 years. Without that investment and being able to do that, we're going to forego a tremendous economic opportunity. So the answer to your question is both. Preservation in some places, in that case, it might be their Green River Basin for Trona, and other places in Laramie County and eastern Wyoming, we're going to have to look at other source supplies. So yeah, I would concur with Representative Simpson. It is a vital component to the future of the state of Wyoming, but it varies from river basin to river basin and industry to industry and municipality to municipality.
Okay. Mr. Co-Chair.
Thanks. So on with the 109 million on the ARP dollars, my understanding was that had to do with infrastructure, was limited to the Clean Water Act dollars. Is that right, Don?
Mr. Chairman, I think you're referring to the Capital Projects Fund,
Right.
which was initially anticipated to be infrastructure, and based upon the guidance, which is not yet formal from the federal government, relates to solely connectivity. It's the $1.068 billion for which SRF qualifying projects would be eligible for any part of that. Let's call it 1.1 billion.
So that was my question is the 109 is we're out, it's not considered part of that, but the remainder would fit within the SRF program. And the question is, we don't have the guidelines on how that would be implemented through that program, loans versus direct grants versus other matching dollars.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we do. And this was the extraordinary activity that allows it to be in the form of grants rather than in the form of loans. What I don't think we have, and defer to Chairman Simpson, is which projects in Wyoming would qualify for those grants.
Oh,
so
Representative Larson says he has information.
Well, and so I think it's important as we talk about that SRF fund, we look at that normally as a loan. But I think as what Mr. Richards is pointing out here is under this ARP money is that the project has to meet the same guidelines that would qualify for an SRF loan in order to get the grant through the ARP money. Is that?
Mr. Chairman, I believe.
Mr. Vice President.
I believe DEQ keeps a list of SRF projects and ranking and eligibility over there, and it's just a matter to get that list as to what they currently have. I think they go through an annual review of that and will list all those SRF eligible programs that have been prioritized or projects within the state of Wyoming, and we may be able to get that from DEQ for the committee to review if they'd like.
So, and the reason I'm asking these questions is, as you can well imagine, there's a long line for that $1 billion already. And we'll probably allocate it. There'll be recommendations from the governor's office, and I don't know if this is on his list, but it probably needs to be. We also know that there's a 5-year payout period for these dollars, and so we're not going to jump in with our feet too fast with those dollars, because we have to let them kind of just see where everything lands over the next year or two on how it's going to be allocated, and we're not in a rush to do it. In other words, we want to slow down the water out of the bucket until the bucket's empty. So, but what I think would be useful for us to know is, what are there high priority projects that would not otherwise be funded, or that we could do matching dollars with either account 1 or account 2 because part of what the criteria is going to be is to maximize the dollars with the maximum contributions. We also want, to any extent possible, skin in the game by whoever benefits from it, so that once again, we maximize those use of those dollars and spread it out as far as we can with the maximum benefit. So I think you just need to take those kind of concepts and begin to evolve into a recommendations. And I don't think we need anything immediate, just because we're not going to move that fast. And we've got to explore all the needs that are out there. The difference with that you have is you've got a regular fund of money to build up $34 million biennially, for Water One, and you are unique in that we have designated below the cap dollars for you that guarantees you that money. And so once again, that, I think that will be part of the balancing act. Knowing that you already have money, unless something is so imperative or critical that it fits into that immediate need basis. So, I mean, that's just another way of saying we're a long way from making decisions, but everything, we have to consider it all, and it's gonna, there's gonna be a tug of war. There already is. Does that help?
A lot, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Chairman Nicholas. That really helps us a lot. So we have funds and we're going to continue to plug along. And we have the infrastructure bill that should flush out in the next few weeks. It's either going to pass or not. And then we've got our ARPA money that we're going to work with. And so we'll just stay abreast with you and determine if there are projects that fit the right categories and all those funding options. We'll be making those recommendations to you to try to maximize state and federal monies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions or comments? Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Is there we'll go on to public comment. Is there any public comment on item number 6, which is the water development projects update? Public comment. Anybody in the room? Being none, we'll go ahead and close off public comment. We're on time. It's the next item on our agenda is number 7, lunch. So we'll go ahead and we'll adjourn